Tonight, America under attack. Horrible images as terrorists strike against symbols of wealth and power. The casualty count unknown, the damage unspeakable. I'm Larry King. We'll have a full hour with lots of guests. We begin with the governor of New York, George Pataki. Governor Pataki, what can you tell us when you bring us up to date on statistics here? We have to go through this. Firemen, policemen, people, what?
Well, Larry, we're just not looking at statistics yet. We're still doing everything in our power to do the searching and rescue efforts because we hope there are still people that can be rescued. The city has the finest emergency forces anywhere in the world, and we've augmented them with our National Guard and state emergency forces as well. And there's an ongoing effort to try to rescue as many people as possible and to make sure we provide the best possible care to those who have been injured. So the time for counting is later. The time for action is now, and that action is underway.
We do know, however, that 200 firemen and 78 policemen are missing, right?
We do know that numbers of police and fire are missing, and it's a tribute to their heroism, that they went down there and risked their lives to protect others and try to save other lives. And, you know, Larry, this is a very dark day for America. But out of the darkness, you see the spirit and you see the hope. I was at St. Vincent's Hospital a little while ago visiting some of the injured firemen and injured policemen, and they were asking about if they could go back to try to do more to help uncover their comrades and the people who are still at risk. So the spirit is strong. We will get through this.
Governor, you've been close to being inside and near this. Can you tell us what's going on?
Well, there's still very great risk downtown of possible additional building collapses. So that's why we've ordered, along with the mayor, New York City south of 14th Street to be shut down. And right now it's simply a matter of trying to contain fires and work through the rubble. We have National Guard heavy equipment, wreckers and tow trucks and others on trying to help out with the police and fire who are going through the rubble and trying to just find as many people that we can save and rescue and help those who need our help as possible. At the same time, we're making sure that the city and the surrounding area is as secure as possible. And again, Larry, I got to tell you that the spirit of the people has been enormous. They haven't been intimidated by this horrible act of cowardly terror. I was just out on a block where from blocks people were lined up waiting to donate blood, not cowed by this terrorism, but showing their faith in America and belief in tomorrow, and that's what we have to make sure triumphs here.
Governor, how close have you gotten to the scene itself?
I've gotten downtown, but I haven't gotten all the way down to the towers themselves, perhaps later on. But what I've been trying to do is coordinate response and make sure that we have the best possible efforts, and I believe we do. And Larry, I also want to say that the cooperation, not just of the city and the state, but the surrounding states, the federal officials have mobilized resources from around the country to help us out, and they are here. And we've gotten expressions of support and condolences from around the world, and we're going to get through this. We're united as a people, we're strong as a people, and we will get through this and make America and New York even stronger.
We know the military's on full alert, and aircraft carriers are coming to your harbor. Is there fear of possibly more?
Well, Larry, I think the federal government's looking to reassure us by having this presence, and we're delighted to have that reassurance. There can never be guarantees. No one predicted this. No one anticipated or had advance warning of this attack. So you never know what tomorrow might bring. But my understanding from my communications with the President and the White House is that they are unaware of any additional specific threats. Obviously, we are on the highest possible state of security and alert, and we'll continue to be so.
Where were you when you heard of the first crash?
I was in the city, and I got a call to turn on the television. There was a plane hit the World Trade Center, and then I saw the second one and immediately called the White House and spoke with the President in a very short period of time and urged him to shut down the airspace around New York, and they immediately shut down the airspace around the country. And who knows what else may have happened if the President hadn't taken that step.
He was in Florida, so he patched you right through.
Right.
What was his response when you got him on the phone?
He was very supportive, offering to do anything the federal government could do, told us that they had gone to the highest possible alert and were undertaking all the security steps that could possibly be taken. And then immediately after that, he shut down the airspace around the country, to his credit, and I'm pleased that that step was taken.
Will New York airports open tomorrow?
We're not predicting at this point. We'll stay in close touch with the federal emergency officials. They are calling the shots. They're the ones who are in charge of the security analysis, and they'll make the determination when the New York City airports should reopen.
Thank you, Governor Pataki. Thanks for giving us the time.
Thank you, Larry.
Next, we go to Washington, D.C., where James Baker, the former Secretary of State, is standing by. Is this, Mr. Secretary, a failure on the part of American policy?
I don't think it's a failure on the part of American policy, Larry. I think that there probably were perhaps some lapses in security. It would be well, I think, for us to consider beefing up some of our intelligence capabilities, particularly our ability in the areas of human intelligence, which we have been sort of de-emphasizing since the mid-'70s. But I don't think it's a policy failure. And if by that you mean that it's linked somehow to what may or may not be happening in the Middle East peace process, I would be very leery of making too direct a connection there. You know, my favorite suspect here, and I have no inside information with respect to this, is Osama bin Laden. He seems to be the favorite suspect of a lot of people. And this guy has done some things in the past that didn't depend on whether or not we were making progress toward peace in the Middle East or not. I mean, if you remember the bombings of the embassy in Kenya and Tanzania, the Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia. So I wouldn't make too direct a connection to the Middle East peace process.
The president said we will take action and see no difference between those who committed the crime and those who harbored them. That's a direct threat against anybody around this. Do you expect to see retaliatory action soon?
Well, I don't know how soon you will see it. I would expect to see it. We have contingency plans. We had them way back when I was dealing with these issues for the United States. And I remember well, as a matter of fact, Larry, when I was meeting with the foreign minister of Iraq in the lead up to the Gulf War in 1991, and I warned him against using weapons of mass destruction against American forces. I said the American people will demand retribution, and we have the means to exact it. And I think they took that to heart. They didn't use weapons of mass destruction, but I think the American people, following the tragic events of today, are going to demand retribution, and I think the United States does have the means to exact it, and I think we will.
Mr. Secretary, when you fear terrorism, as all of us have to fear it to be logical human beings, it's around us, did you ever think of anything like this?
Not anything of this scale. I mean, you have to really be amazed, or at least I'm amazed, at the degree of success. 4 airplanes were hijacked. 75%, 3 out of the 4, found their targets. We haven't had a hijacking in this country in over 10 years. And yet these people were successful in hijacking the aircraft, not only hijacking them, taking control of them, flying them into their intended targets. It really is rather surprising and rather amazing. And I'm reminded also, Larry, of the successes that American counterterrorism and counterintelligence forces have had through the years. I remember during the time that I served, any number of instances where we would have a threat and we would catch it in time and we would roll it up. We would prevent it from happening. That happened over and over and over again. It didn't happen today, quite tragically. We didn't catch this one.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Good to see you.
Secretary James Baker, the former Secretary of State. Now we go back to New York. Standing by are Teresa Ward. She worked in the World Trade Center, in the number 2 World Trade Center on the 33rd floor. Bill Heitman, who worked on the 81st floor, was also working at the time of the 93 bombing. John Avarone, who works at the World Trade Financial Center, that's right next door. And Tim Cavanaugh, who works about a quarter mile away from the World Trade Center. He was on the phone to a friend who works in the World Trade Center, was suddenly cut off. And Rose Arce, our CNN producer in New York, who's been on the scene. She's outside. There's Rose. All day long, it seems, on top of this. Let's start with Teresa. Where were you, Teresa? What happened?
I was in my office, just starting my day, booting up my computer, having my coffee, and we felt the building shudder. And at first we didn't really know what was happening, but we all sort of walked out of our offices and looked around. And as we looked out the window towards the West Side Highway, we saw nothing but paper and debris floating from the sky. It was, overwhelming.
Did you panic?
Actually, we didn't. There were a lot of people in my office that were in the '93 bombing, so everyone just sort of decided to leave, and everybody left in an orderly fashion via the stairs. And it was very orderly. In fact, everybody was really calm. So we were fortunate in that regard.
Now, is it true, Teresa, when you were outside, they told you it was okay to go back in?
No, actually, what happened was we were in the stairwell. I was on the 9th floor, and there was an announcement on the PA system that basically said that there was an incident in One World Trade, but that Two World Trade was okay, and that you could return to your offices. It was okay. And at that point, a few coworkers and I jumped on the elevator, and we thought for a moment about going back up, then thought better of it, and decided to go down. And at that point, we had no clue what was happening with One World Trade or Two World Trade. And when we got out to the street, it was just pandemonium.
Teresa, do you know why you didn't go back up despite the fact the announcement said you could?
Well, it just seemed like there was so much going on, and we felt that it would be better, as everyone was exiting the building already, to just gather with everybody from my firm on the concourse level. So it just seemed like the sensible thing to do at the time, and in retrospect, probably saved
Very
a lot
sensible.
of lives.
Good
Yeah.
instinct. Bill Heitman worked in World Trade Center 1, the first building hit. He was working on the 81st floor. What was happening? And you were also in the 93, right, Bill?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. What happened at the moment of impact? Where were you? What happened?
At the moment of impact, I was knocked out of my chair, and we just briefly panicked and headed towards the middle of the floor to get away from the windows. And then we headed for the stairwell and started heading down from the 81st floor in an orderly fashion. And aside from some people that were suffering from asthma, and some injured, it was actually well-spirited going down, until we started getting down to the 30s and the 40s.
Then what?
And the firemen started passing us, and we're collapsing on the stairs.
The firemen were collapsing?
Yes, just from the loads they were carrying, the oxygen tanks, the hoses. It was really bad. It was tough to see these guys.
Did you say to yourself, "Here we go again"?
Yes, I did. But at this particular point, it didn't seem like it was a bombing. And after the initial crash going down, it seemed like the worst of it was over.
And you did or did not know it was a plane?
We had heard when we were in the stairwell. Probably it took a total of an hour for me and the people that I was to get downstairs. We had heard when we were about halfway down that a plane some kind of plane had hit, but at that point we thought it was small, a helicopter, a small craft airplane.
As soon as you got out, what did you do?
I beg your pardon?
When you got out of the building, what did you do? Did you hang around or take off?
As soon as we got down to the lobby level, I myself was actually surprised at the damage that there was to the concourse level of the Trade Center. I thought at that point the condition would look not as damaged, but as soon as we got downstairs, we were walking in ankle-deep water, and there seemed to be this an urgency to just get us out of the building, where I thought that people were just going to be directed to like triage units or something. But once I stepped outside onto the street, there was something really wrong. And that's when I think the fear of the buildings collapsing really became apparent. And I had only been out of the building less than a minute when tower number 2 came down.
Oh boy. John Ivarone, you work at the World Trade Financial Center. That's next door. What did you see? Where were you?
I was coming back from a coffee break, walked onto our trading desk and saw, everyone watching the TV monitors, which was, I didn't know what the heck was going on. I thought the market was going to go crazy or something. And then someone told me that a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. It sounded like a boom. It sounded like actually a big bomb, and that, everyone was just calm at first, but a couple of my traders ran by me, went immediately down the stairwell and started evacuating. I just followed them, went down to the right by the seaport, seaport area, right by the World Financial Center, and you could just see it. It was just smoke was billowing out.
The booms you felt, John, were from the second plane, right? Because they were already looking at the accident of the first plane?
Right, exactly. The boom was certainly from the second plane. But, it was amazing. It was just standing across the street, because my building is right across the street from the World Trade Center. And just watching people, there's people up on the 80th floor just waving.
What did you see? Did any people jump?
I saw 15 to 20 people jump. It was, without a doubt, it was the most...
Oof.
At first I saw a little debris coming out, and then you saw... It was definitely bodies the way they were. It was something you could never ever imagine. Like even in movies, it was the saddest thing I ever saw in my life.
Was there any fear for your building and your safety?
Absolutely. Being right across the street, of course. I guess when something like that happens, you don't start thinking about your building. But thank God the one guy I was following just started running away, and I followed him. And we got to a place in Battery Park where you can actually, we just saw people just waving for like helicopters, anything, and then and I guess in fear of getting burned or something, they just leapt.
So you were an eyewitness to death. You were an eyewitness to people jumping.
Absolutely.
Oh.
It was, and I didn't realize it until getting home and watching on television what I'd really witnessed, and then that's when I had.
Boy. Before we talk with Tim and Rose, we understand we have on the phone with us a member of the New York City Power Rescue Team. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am.
Okay. What is the name of your group? What organization is it?
Well, actually, we're fugitive recovery agents, and we're down here offering our assistance with federal authorities. We're waiting for the coordination, and then we'll be going in with any other rescue teams.
Can you tell us where you are right now?
We were right down at the building assessing the damage for my team, and it was a little bit smoggy, obviously. We're covered in soot right now, and we're taking our break until we can coordinate what's going on.
What early assessment do you have?
Right now, it's a mess. It's like Beirut down there. It's really a mess.
Can you describe it a little more? What do you see?
A lot of debris all over the place, obviously. Chairs, we even saw airplane chairs, over the place. That was
really?
Unusual, yes. Glass buildings 7-8 blocks away, smashed. It's devastation, completely.
And have you seen any bodies?
Not yet, we haven't. We're waiting for everybody else, wait for coordination to get together, all the federal authorities, also state authorities, and then we'll join a team then.
And what's your role?
I am actually, we are tunnelers, really. We will go through the debris, small cracks, anything that we can do.
Why do you do this?
It's what we do.
You've worked lots of things, nothing comparable to this, naturally.
No, nothing. I've never experienced something like this before.
How long do you think this is going to take to go through?
A long time. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done.
Thank you very much for speaking with us. We'll be in touch again.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Back to the New York Bureau and Tim Cavanaugh, who works about a quarter-mile away from the World Trade Center. As we understand it, Tim, you were on the phone?
Actually, my friend's brother was on the line with him, and they got cut off immediately. And then I was on a conversation with his brother, and he told me that his brother had heard the first crash, and he was informing his brother of what had happened. And then all of a sudden, the phone got cut off from him, and that was the last he's heard of his brother since. I brought his picture so that maybe if there's someone out there who can see him, who has seen him, or if he's in a hospital somewhere, maybe someone can call and let him.
Can we see it?
Sure.
Where's the picture?
It's right here in my hand.
Want to hold it up? Okay, so we get a close-up of this. And he worked in the building?
He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald on the 102nd floor. It's a guy I coach football with. I've known him my whole life. He's a great man.
You are probably resorting to prayer.
Actually, I walked from my office, which is a quarter-mile away, and it was desolate. It was like a nuclear bomb had gone off, and there were ashes, like, in the street, like about 1 foot to 6 inches of ashes, if you could imagine that, walking down the street. And I walked over to Our Lady of Victory Church, which is right down the street from Wall Street. And Wall Street, usually they have the barricades there, and there was nothing. It was gone. And you know, I picked up a piece of paper, and I saw the paper and read it, and it was from the 106th floor of the World Trade Center, and I just knew that it was, you know, you couldn't imagine it. It was like being in downtown Beirut in America.
Good grief. And on the scene is Rose Arce. Rose is a CNN producer in New York, a veteran CNN producer, and a very capable CNN producer. Where were you when this happened this morning, Rose? I can't hear Rose. Okay. I'm sorry, Rose. Okay. We'll have to check back with you, Rose. We're having difficulty. Let's go to Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. Jamie, first, we've heard the briefings earlier. What kind of shape is that building in?
Pretty bad shape, Larry. It's nearly 12 hours after this plane slammed into the side of the Pentagon. The building is still burning. The firefighters say they have the blaze contained in an area, but it's still not under control. In fact, if you look right behind my head, you can see some flames licking out of the roof there. That's part of the firefighting technique of trying to cut the roof open and let the fire burn through in order to put this out. Nevertheless, the Pentagon is vowing, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and President Bush both saying that the building will open for business as usual tomorrow. That may be possible if they just open the other side of the building, where, of course, the Secretary's office is, the Pentagon briefing room, the National Military Command Center, all on the other side of the building. You know, in some ways, there was a little bit of luck in today's incident in that this part of the building was under renovation. That meant that some of the new space that had just been renovated was not yet occupied, and it also had improved fire retardant capabilities. And on the old side, over basically in this direction, that part of the building, people had just moved out to get ready for the next phase of renovation, so there weren't nearly as many people as might have been in the building at that time of day. Nevertheless, Pentagon officials expect the death toll to be high, but they are not saying publicly what they think that death toll will be. Larry?
And Jamie, have you been able at all to see the aircraft?
Well, you know, earlier today I got right up next to the building and I took a look at some of the pieces that were outside. There were only very small pieces of that American Airlines jetliner, a cockpit that was a window that was all smashed, part of the fuselage that was bent and twisted, but most of the parts of the plane are still inside the building, according to people who have been in and seen it.
Thank you, Jamie. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. We have a panel of senators joining us, and before we check with them, here is just a moment of what the statement made tonight by President George Bush at the White House. Watch.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
We'll be hearing in a while from a terrorist expert, an aviation expert. We'll also be hearing from the former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, and we'll be checking with others. But right now, a panel of 4 distinguished senators have joined us in Washington. They are Senator John Warner, Republican of Virginia, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee; Senator John Kerry, Democrat of Massachusetts, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, including the Subcommittee on International Operations and Terrorism; Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, member of the Select Intelligence Committee. She's chairing the Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Technology, Terrorism, and Government Information; and Senator Fred Thompson, Republican of Tennessee, a member of the Select Intelligence Committee, a ranking member of Governmental Affairs. We'll start with Senator Warner. Was this a failure of information techniques tonight and today, Senator?
Well, Larry, I spent much of the afternoon with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and indeed had an opportunity to talk with the President from the Pentagon. That we assess tomorrow. Tonight, we grieve for those who've lost their lives, the wounded, their families, and we look upon this as the greatest tragedy in the history of our country, but also one of its finest hours, when we've seen this country come together like never before, whether it's the firemen or the rescue operators or the military all over the world, and we stand with one voice being spoken by our President, and he did very well tonight.
Senator Kerry, did your committee on international operations and terrorism ever actually fear something like this?
Absolutely, absolutely. But let me join John, and I know all my colleagues, in just expressing, I think all of us here in Washington are feeling in very personal ways the loss of what's happened here. I know that I had one friend I know of already on that plane from Boston, and I dread the learning of perhaps others, but for thousands of families tonight, there is just a huge loss, and I think in every American there's a sense of, there's a fury, an intense burning fury about this, and a determination to do what is right about it. We have always known this could happen. We've warned about it, we've talked about it. I regret to say, I served on the Intelligence Committee up until last year. I can remember after the bombings of the embassies, after TWA 800, we went through this flurry of activity talking about it, but not really doing the hard work of responding. We need to do that now, and I'm confident that the size of this, the nature of this loss, and the nature of this attack are going to motivate everybody to come together to do that. And I think that's imperative. And we also, I think, Larry, I was heartened by the President's comments tonight, need to make certain that those countries that sponsor terrorism, that support it, that harbor these fugitives, are as much a part of the problem as those who engage in the terrorist act themselves. And we need to make certain as a country we respond to that boldly and bravely, and not recklessly, but boldly.
Senator Feinstein, what are the next few days going to be like? There's going to be opinions from, what's your read on what's next?
Oh, I think there are many of us that feel that this was an act of war against the United States, that its loss is our human loss is going to be extreme, that the deviltry, the cunning, and the evil behind the act is extraordinary, and that we need to respond, and that America needs to come together with a unity and a purpose and respond. We cannot be a paper tiger. This act, in my view, it wasn't coincidence now that the World Trade Center has been the victim twice. And I think it's a symbol of America, and it's a symbol of what we want to protect as well. And so I think tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, the leadership has announced that there will be a resolution on the floor of the Senate for many of us. And I'm one that believes very strongly that rather than arguing over missile defense, the asymmetric threat against the United States is the most serious one. And we've had a good indication of that today.
Senator Thompson, President John F. Kennedy once said, when asked about his own safety, if someone is willing to give up their own life, that is almost impossible to protect against. What do you do when you have people like today obviously in numbers more than 10 of it, a total 4 planes, who died for this. How do you counter that?
It's very difficult. I think there'll always be a window of vulnerability that we'll have. We're living in a different world now. I think we let our defenses down a bit after the Cold War and wanted to enjoy the peace dividend. But the fact of the matter is the world's a more dangerous place in many respects than it has been in times past. We're now seeing the other side of the technology coin. Technology has been a wonderful thing for us, but it also allows bad people to do bad things that they couldn't do a short time ago. We saw one form of that today, probably in the communications area. There are several other threats out there, though. The missile threat is one of them. It is real. The cyber terrorism that could shut down our computers and our communication networks and our transportation system and all that is very real. We simply have to get about implementing the policies, appropriating the funds necessary to address these across the board.
Senator Warner, what do you say to Americans in their grief about what they should do? You try not to let terrorism affect you, but people are not going to go easily to airports tomorrow. What do you say to them?
Have faith in this great country. We've survived, although this is the worst, we've survived other crises. I see tonight in Washington among my colleagues, we're no longer Democrat, Republican. We're united as a Congress behind our president, and we're going to take every step. Number one, to find out what happened and see that it cannot be repeated. And secondly, we're a nation under the rule of law, but we will relentlessly pursue and hold accountable those who perpetrated this crime against our citizens.
And when we pursue that, Senator Kerry, does America as a nation pursue it legally? Does it go through world courts, or does it take off?
There are three ways to pursue it, Larry. One is multilaterally, which takes more time. That's the way George Bush, the father, did it in the Gulf War. You can do it bilaterally. You and another nation, you can reach an agreement, you can work together. And you can do it unilaterally when the circumstances call for it. I personally believe this is a circumstance because of the nature of it. As Diane said, as many have said today, this is an act of war. The difficulty is, unlike Pearl Harbor, this is a stealth enemy. Japan was identifiable. We knew where to find them ultimately, and after chasing around, and we could identify. Here, we know pretty much. I mean, there's a great certainty among many people about where the fingers point. But ultimately, we don't want to be a terrorist ourselves. We have to do what we do with the knowledge and the certainty that we can determine, but we must be prepared, absolutely, to move unilaterally if we need to protect the honor and the civility that we stand for. And I think that everybody in this country would support that based on the proper response with the proper information.
Senator Feinstein, what if? What if it's bin Laden? Well, if it is bin Laden, what do? You go into Afghanistan, you look for him, you bomb, what do you do?
I don't think America can be a paper tiger in this instance. This was a major attack, and let's face it, there isn't going to be chaos. We're not going to bend down. We are going to rise up as one people. And it's got to be stopped, and you have to ferret it out. I agree with what Dick Holbrooke said on this network earlier. You've got to work with our allies, the NATO allies, particularly Russia, China, and the moderate Arab countries. That's Egypt, that's Jordan, that's the Saudis. And we have to make a statement that is so strong that any country that harbors, that trains, that gives money to, that supports, becomes an enemy of the civilized world. Because if this can happen here, it can happen in other places. Terrorism, as our report will say very shortly, isn't a crisis, it's an ongoing condition. And we've got to change the condition. So I must say, I feel very strongly about this, that the United States must respond. Those of us that have had the classified briefings over a period of time understand some of the networks that are functioning out there, even in this country, as a matter of fact. And it's not too difficult to put together 2 and 2, and I think get 4.
All right.
Larry,
Senator Thompson?
Can I just say that Putin Putin was one of the first heads of state to call our president. And the Secretary of Defense this afternoon, colleagues, I was there when he talked with the Russian defense minister. That's an example of the type of support we're getting. The world has got to come and help us solve this problem, because terrorism is a common enemy to all of us.
And Senator Thompson, if the state that harbors them is as responsible as those who commit it, therefore are those civilians in peril?
Yes, they are. The powers that be in those nations have put them in peril. Saddam uses his civilians, as we know. There's no way around that, but we've got to face up to it. I agree with Diane that the greatest deterrent that we can have is the knowledge in the minds of potential terrorists around the world that there will be swift, accurate retribution. Unfortunately, there's just no way around that.
And Larry, could I just
Thank you. We're out of time, but we'll do a lot more with you in the nights ahead with all four of you and others. Secretary William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense, will be joining us. As we go to meet him, there was an extraordinary scene on the Capitol steps tonight. Look at what happened. Watch.
As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow.
September 11th, 2001. That date will inject our brains. Joining us from Washington is former Senator, former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, Chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group. Were you shocked, or was there an expectancy of something like this?
Well, I, like every American, every person watching this the world over, was shocked to see the act of terror actually being perpetrated on the screen and the horror that we all witnessed. Was I surprised? The answer is no. We have known for some time that Osama bin Laden and other organizations have targeted the United States abroad and at home. We formed the so-called Hart-Rudman Commission several years ago, and they filed 3 reports, the last of which was quite prophetic, indicating that we should anticipate acts of terrorism on American soil by terrorists who may, in fact, use weapons of mass destruction and engage in nearly simultaneous types of multiple attacks. And so it doesn't come as a surprise. It comes as a surprise or shock to see the horror that we have witnessed today. But we have got to take more measures. I agree with much of what has been stated this evening, but we also have to take care that we don't engage in the wholesale slaughter of innocents abroad. We have to go after those groups and those who support those groups in terms of our responses.
So we don't go in and bombs away. What do we do?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure we have the right information. And we don't want to prejudge the matter, although those footprints of guilt would seem to lead in one very certain direction. I think we go to those who are harboring the suspected groups and serve them notice. I think President Bush did that very forcefully tonight. And that they must produce those individuals, and certainly they will face a number of consequences. And I don't think we have to spell them out. There will be certainly diplomatic, economic, and perhaps even military action. But we should await for the President and his national security team to deliver that particular message.
You worked there for a long time. Were you a little surprised that the Pentagon wasn't better protected?
Well, the Pentagon, as you note from its proximity to the airport, really cannot be better protected in terms of aircraft flying near the airport and passing over the Pentagon itself. It's been one of my worst nightmares over the years to be out on the parade ground or in my office and know that at any time a plane could, through either accidentally or be directed into the Pentagon itself. There is virtually no way that one can protect the Pentagon against that type of an attack unless you banned all flights going into National itself, but even that might not be sufficient. So it's almost impossible to protect against an airplane engaging that type of activity.
What do we do about a bin Laden? We've heard the name, we've seen him occasionally. He's obviously been involved in acts of terrorism over the year, but what do you do about someone like this?
I think the first thing that we should resist doing, and that is focusing solely on him. To the extent that he is responsible, he will be held accountable and he will receive just punishment. but there may be other bin Ladens out there, and there'll be more following. What we have to do is to eliminate the climate under which they're allowed to train, to be funded, and to perpetrate these acts. Senator Warner talked about President Putin calling President Bush today. I was in Moscow a year ago when one of the bombs went off, destroying one of their buildings. I went on national television pledging the United States to work hand in hand with the Russian people because they were being terrorized. And so this is an international problem. We have to gather our allies and say, this transcends all borders. When America is wounded, the rest of the world bleeds as well. And what happens here can have a dramatic impact on the life and the lifestyles of so many the world over. So we are in this together, and every American is in this together. Much like we came together after Pearl Harbor, we're coming together now, and we will respond as one nation.
And, Mr. Secretary, it must be asked, how did they get on these airplanes?
Well, that's to be determined. Obviously, they were able to slip through the security. They may have had inside assistance. You may have had a situation in which bin Laden or another group has been placing sleepers for a year or so or less. We don't know exactly, having assistance to allow them to get on. There are many ways in which that could have happened, but that's going to have to await the investigation itself by the FBI and others.
Thank you very much, good friend. Always good seeing him. Not under these circumstances, though. William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense. In a moment, we're going to talk with Tim O'Brien, the CNN correspondent, close friend of the Olsen family, as was this program. Barbara Olsen passed away today on American Air Flight 77. Brian Jenkins with us in Los Angeles, the terrorism expert. And Arthur Woke, the famed attorney who has done a lot of work involving aviation and who is, we understand, an angry man tonight. Before we check in with Tim and Brian and Arthur, tonight on the Capitol steps, the members of House and Senate gathered. Watch this. Ted Olson is the Solicitor General of the United States. You know him very well from the many, many appearances he made before the United States Supreme Court and the Florida Supreme Court in the question over the election of Bush over Gore. His wife was Barbara Olson, who appeared on this program so many times in the last 4 weeks, almost every night. Barbara Olson was on American Air Flight 77 that left Dulles, bound for Los Angeles, and crashed into the Pentagon. I spoke to Ted Olson today briefly, and it was just sad, so sad to speak to someone who had just lost his wife. Another gentleman who spoke to him was a much closer friend to the Olson family. He's Tim O'Brien, CNN correspondent. He called Ted on the phone. We understand, Tim, that you were at their wedding.
I was in their wedding. I was also out at his house this afternoon along with a number of other friends. It was a very sad afternoon.
Now, I know he told us she called him, but he went into detail with you. What happened during that call? This is the only information we have on these terrorists.
She was able to call him twice. How she could pull that off, we don't know, but she did. The phone went dead the first time after a very brief conversation, maybe less than a minute, and she called him back. And she said to him, "What do I tell the pilot to do?" Vintage Barbara, ready to take charge. She was in the back of the plane, huddled with other passengers, and we're told flight personnel and presumably the pilot. She said that they were armed with knives and box cutters, cardboard cutters. If they were armed with other weapons, such as machine guns or any kind of gun, you'd think she might have said that first, but she said no, knives and box cutters. I asked Ted, did she tell you how many people were there, how many hijackers were there? And Ted said no, but she referred to them in the plural, so there was more than one. What about nationality? Did you get any sense of that? No. Motives? No.
They were all in the back of the plane, right, Tim? The pilots and the passengers were herded to the back of the 757.
That's the understanding I get from Ted, correct.
So whoever took over that plane was up front, and one of them had to know how to fly it.
Presumably that's the case, yeah, but you know that's speculation, and we don't know for sure. It's conceivable there was a co-pilot who still may have been in the cockpit. We don't know, but there were flight personnel and most of the passengers huddled in the back. Incidentally, Barbara was not supposed to be on that flight today. Her original plan was to fly to California yesterday. Today is Ted Olson's birthday, and she wanted to be with him last night, and so that was the cost.
And when she was on the phone, Ted had already known about the crashes in New York, right?
That is correct, and he did tell her about that, so she had a good idea of what she was up against. She knew about the 2 crashes at the World Trade Center.
Tim, you stay with us. Brian Jenkins, you're an expert on terrorism. You've been involved in things like this for a long time, but nothing compared to this. Were you shocked?
Shocked, but not surprised.
Not surprised?
Not surprised, no. The possibility of a large-scale terrorist attack on this country is something that we have anticipated for a long time. There have been previous incidents involving multiple coordinated attacks. We have dealt with previous situations where it was either threatened or certainly a concern of the authorities that a hijacked aircraft would be crashed into into the middle of a city.
But from what Miss Olson described them as having, how did they get on the plane with that?
Well, it depends. I mean, that's difficult to say, and we don't know. I mean, people do board aircraft with all sorts of small things.
And get on?
And potentially get on. I suspect that's going to change now, but I mean, people board aircraft with small penknives. They board aircraft with various kinds of metal objects. It does, however, raise some questions about how they were able to get on the aircraft and take control of the cockpit. This is not a standard hijacking where somebody seizes a passenger hostage and orders a pilot to fly to another city.
And in fact, in 3 of the 4 operations, they succeeded.
They did succeed.
The one that went down in Pennsylvania was obviously heading for Washington. Is that correct? And something must have happened.
That's a safe presumption.
Arthur Woke, you're an expert at aviation accidents. You've been involved in the courts, often dealing with this, and we understand you're quite angry at this. Why?
Well, because to me, it's disgusting to hear the platitudes of the politicians inside the Beltway saying that the government is in charge. I thought the government was in charge this morning. Where was the government yesterday, 5 months ago, or a year ago when this was unfolding? Where were the national security agencies that are supposed to protect us from this? Where are our allies who are supposed to be part of this anti-terrorist network? Why are there no sky marshals on aircraft anymore? Was that a budgetary consideration of the FAA? Maybe that could have stopped it. So what bothers me, Larry, is that we're talking about burying what may be 25,000 people. There weren't supposed to be any more Pearl Harbors. We put in place a system to prevent this from happening. This was not a minimal terrorist act. This was something that required the cooperation of many, many people. And I don't understand, and I'm sure many of our viewers don't understand, how this could possibly happen. Where was the government?
All right, before I have Brian respond, Tim O'Brien, I know you're a reporter, so you're going to be objective about this. Does Mr. Woke have a point?
I think he does have a point. How much of a point depends on perhaps where you sit. Certainly there are some security breaches here. One of your guests pointed out that we haven't had a terrorist hijacking in 10 years, and maybe we have gotten a little lax. But we also have to recognize when people are willing to give up their lives to stage something like this, it's going to be very hard to stop under any circumstances.
And Brian, what do you make of what Arthur said? I mean, obviously, there was a failure today.
There clearly was a failure, no question about it. We have to determine what happened with regard to intelligence, what happened with regard to security. But at the same time, we have to realize that there is an ongoing war, that there's a constant flow of information, threats, warnings, information passed on by intelligence agents. And many times, by evacuating an embassy, by issuing an alert, by raising the level of security, these attacks are thwarted. Those victories are invisible because you can't count things that don't occur.
So we could have averted 14 things last month. We didn't know about it.
It is entirely possible. What we do see, and certainly saw dramatically today, are the failures. When the intelligence fails, when the security fails, that's what we were faced with today. Can we get better on security? Yes. Can we provide absolute security? Absolutely not.
Arthur, as I quoted earlier, if someone wants to give up their life, that's awful hard to contain, isn't it?
Larry, I think I agree with that. I think that we are supposed to have a system in place to prevent this from happening. And you can't stop terrorism at the gate at the airport. You stop terrorists before they enter the country. You stop them by investigating their cells when they're in the country. You avoid this by exercising as much security operations as you possibly can. I'm no expert in security. I'm just a guy who saw it on CNN Live today. And all I can tell you is that there weren't supposed to be any of these in this country, and the people who are supposed to have been in charge were asleep at the switch, in my opinion.
And also, since you're an expert on pilots and things, were you surprised that whoever did this was able to commandeer these aircraft?
Not really.
To fly them?
Not really. Remember, we have no sky marshals on the aircraft, so we have no one armed on aircraft randomly to prevent this from happening. The door that separates the cockpit from the rest of the airplane is really just a symbol of security. It's not real security. And finally, it doesn't take someone who's a rocket scientist to fly an airplane once it's airborne and to fly it into a building. So you don't have to be a sophisticated pilot to accomplish this, sadly.
All right, let's do what we haven't done yet today, and since this is a special edition of Larry King Live, and we'll be doing this, of course, throughout the week and CNN 24 hours a day, let's include the audience. Knoxville, Tennessee, hello.
Yes, sir, Mr. King. I was wondering what you and the panel thought about the possibility of the United States Army shooting down the plane over Pennsylvania. I know the Pentagon has denied it, but if they knew that plane was heading for D.C., is it possible that they did? And if they didn't, would they have later if it had gotten farther?
Yeah, Tim, supposing a plane's heading in, it's got passengers, it's going to go to the White House or to Camp David. Do you shoot it down?
If there's that threat, you may have to, but certainly there are steps that can be taken before that threat materializes. First, you try to make contact with that plane, find out where it's going. But if it appears headed for the White House or the Pentagon or the Capitol or Camp David, and it's off route, that may be the only alternative you have, and it would make sense.
You agree, Brian?
In some cases, yes. The reality, however, in terms of major urban areas, airports are located in urban areas. Planes take off. It's not a long flight from Dulles to the Pentagon. It's not a long flight from some of the airports in the northeastern part of the United States to New York.
How about the caller, though? You've got a plane, you know it's diverted. It's obviously not going to San Francisco.
That certainly is one of those horrible decisions that someday I suppose someone is going to have to make.
St. Louis, hello.
Hello. My question is, we seem to have become very complacent, and we're being very sophisticated and very rational about how to respond to this. However, on all of the channels, and especially on CNN, which, by the way, I think has done a fabulous job, Osama bin Laden seems to be the prime suspect here. We've heard his name for years, and he continued to operate. And my question is, he supposedly 3 weeks ago gave notice that this was going to happen. Where was everyone? Who dropped the ball? I know there's only so much you can do, and you said they might have averted 14 other incidents last month, but no one averted this incident.
Tim, was that a fact? Did we know that bin Laden had made some sort of threat 3 weeks ago?
There was knowledge that he made some kinds of threats, but they were general, and there was nothing new about that. He's making threats all the time. I think this may underscore the point made by Senator Feinstein earlier in the show, that it's not just an attack or a war that we must declare on individual terrorists, but rather on terrorism itself. Wherever it exists, the United States and other countries should be working to eradicate it, root and branch, or sooner or later it may strike home, as
Brian?
it did today.
I agree that Osama bin Laden certainly does make threats all the time. We can shut down the country. I mean, the number of threats coming in from Osama bin Laden, not just Osama bin Laden, but other organizations against the United States, is a continuing flow of information. There probably has not been a day in the last 10 years when there were not terrorist threats made against the United States somewhere in the world.
And Larry, that's just the point, you see. That's just the point. Terrorism didn't start yesterday. It didn't start last year. In fact, we both remember for the last 30 years or 40 years we've been talking about the seriousness of terrorism. It's really about time that we get our act together so that we don't wring our hands after the terrorist act has already occurred and people have lost their lives. We're supposed to be able to prevent this stuff. You know, they call it the 21st century threat. Well, it may be the 21st century threat, but we have the 21st century capability to deal with this threat. And obviously, we're not
Are you
dealing
saying,
with it.
Arthur, every flight in America should have secret people on board watching the flight, that it should be treated as El Al treats every flight?
If that's what it takes, then that's what we have to do.
Indianapolis, hello.
Good evening, Larry.
Hi.
Like many Americans, I watched in horror from work today, all day long. My question, actually, the question I was asked by my 13-year-old when she got home from school, is this going to change our entire way of living? Not in the sense of being afraid, but what about fuel prices? Today I went to work, gas was $1.62. I come out of work, it's $3 and $4 a gallon.
Really?
What about our economy?
Tim, what do you think the most stark changes will be?
I'm less worried about fuel prices than civil liberties, which may be sacrificed in the aftermath of this. And that may have to be the case. A great Supreme Court justice once said the Bill of Rights is not a suicide pact. We will have to take steps to protect ourselves, and some of those steps we may find repugnant today, but they may become necessary. I think that should be of concern to everybody.
Brian?
Well, the fact is that we have found in other places where terrorist campaigns have been waged, life does go on. Nonetheless,
but it changes, doesn't it?
It does change in a way where we will see probably...
Or do we get complacent?
If nothing happens for years and years, then inevitably we will get complacent again. However, this episode, the magnitude of this, is going to leave a deep scar on the psyche of the American people. Now, that can turn into the kind of resolve, the kind of determination that the previous guests have been talking about. But it also can make us, in some cases, a more callous, harder-edged people. We are where the United States probably was on now December 8th or 9th, 1941. This generation, which felt so safe, has never experienced anything like this. This is greater probably in casualties, I suspect, than the London Blitz.
And Arthur Walk, do you now want massive lines at airports? Do you want intensive security? Do you want people to get to the airport 3 hours before a flight?
No, on the contrary. I think that the system we have in place needs to be made better. I think we need sky marshals on aircraft, but I think the people who are responsible for our security, both domestically and internationally, have to get down to work. That's really the problem.
Tim O'Brien, we began this segment, and by the way, CNN, of course, will be on top of this 24 hours a day, and we'll have more special guests tomorrow night as well here on Larry King Live. But, Tim, I want to leave on Barbara. I understand Rudy Giuliani is in New York. Rudy?
Yes. Essential, then obviously do it. The upper part of Manhattan will be open. But if tomorrow is a day in which you want to stay home and stay with your family and give comfort and support maybe to other people that have been affected by this, it would be a good day to do that. The point that Richie Shearer makes is people are wonderful, and I mean this in the best sense of the word. We've had thousands and thousands of people that have come to help us. When I was down at the site near the World Trade Center, I met a lot of the National Guard's people that the governor has sent, really wonderful young men and women. We have enough volunteers now. We have more volunteers, frankly, than we need at this point. And what we need to do is to focus the efforts of the professionals that are there in being able to do the recovery and try to save as many lives as we can and restore services as quickly as possible. We may be asking for more volunteers tomorrow and the next day and the day after, but right now we don't need any more volunteers.
Mr. Mayor, is there still hope that there are people who are still alive and well?
Yes, there's hope. There's hope that there are people that are still still alive.
How is the rescue effort hampered by the darkness? What do you
we moved a lot of lights in so that the area is being lit now so that I don't think the rescue effort is going to be hampered by the darkness. The rescue effort is hampered by the fact that there's still fire there. There are still unsound structures, and it's still dangerous, although the rescue effort is now taking place. But if you're asking me, is it hampered? It's hampered because of the conditions, not because of the nighttime.
Is there a concern about a long procession of heavy bulldozers and other heavy construction equipment making its way down to lower Manhattan? What is that going to be used for?
That's going to be used to move debris out of the way so that the emergency vehicles can get in and out quickly, so that we can get the ambulances in in a more expeditious fashion than we've been able to do. And I want to thank the Deputy Mayor Rudy Washington, who has spent most of the day coordinating, getting all of that emergency equipment in the right place, ready to move. If you go along Houston Street, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of pieces of equipment that are lined up to move in and to take debris out. And now they've started doing that. And I think that's probably what you observed. You probably observed them starting the.
Are you concerned about the city tonight in light of all of the things that have happened during the daylight hours today?
Am I concerned from the point of view of the actions and activities of the people of the city? The police department is out in large numbers. You want to explain the force that you have out there? And no, I'm not concerned. But
we're pretty much out in full force this evening. Southern Manhattan, as you know, we're primarily concentrating on the rescue efforts. The rest of the city is basically, some of the entry points are shut down. The tunnels are shut down. As of midnight, there will be no more traffic coming into Southern Manhattan from 14th Street. We're going to shut that down. I think the city's pretty secure, and we're going to continue doing what we're doing in the rescue effort and just hope for the best.
Any reports of lawlessness, any reports of any looting or anything?
Absolutely not. There's been no reports of looting or any other problems out of the ordinary. And as I said, the boroughs are working pretty normally, and so far so good.
Mayor, did you see the president's comments tonight, and have you spoken to him again?
No, I spoke to him earlier today, and I only heard the very end of his comments because I was coming back from the World Trade Center.
He said thousands to die.
I don't know the number at this point. That may be very well be the case. At this point, we're still in the effort of trying to recover people. I don't know the numbers yet, but I mean, this is going to be, as I said, the numbers are going to be very, very high. I mean,
Mr. Mayor,
just if you think of the number of people that were in the building at the time, we've been spending time with the medical examiner, who, by the way, was injured himself, and so Dr. Hirsch was injured and had to be treated, but he's organized his office, and they are ready to deal with thousands and thousands of bodies if they have to.
Mr. Mayor, earlier in the day,
and we'll give them the support and the help to do that. He was down there, yes, and he got injured. I mean, he's okay, but he's obviously he was hurt. I mean, he was beaten up pretty badly. His body hurts, and he's well. No, I mean his body was. He got hit with debris. No one beat him up. He got hit. He described it that way. I said, "How do you feel, Dr. Hurd?" He said, "I got pretty beaten up." And then what happened is he got hit with debris.
Mr. Mayor, earlier in the day, you weren't sure exactly what the radius of damage was like, what blocks were involved, how much debris had fallen on surrounding areas.
If you go down there now, the last time I saw it was when I was leaving this morning. It's horrendous. I mean, it's filled with debris. It's filled with dust. It's going to be a heck of a cleanup effort.
How far down? Battery Park City, was that affected?
Well, the power is out in the lower part of Manhattan on the west side. So there is no power at this point. So that's why we had to bring in the lights to light up the area so that they can do the rescue effort. And the people that live at Battery Park City have been evacuated. They were taken to New Jersey. So I don't know when that'll be back. That's going to take a while for that to come back.
What about other South Street, Seaport?
So on the east side of downtown Manhattan has power, and exactly where the demarcation line is, I'm not sure. But over by one police plaza going east, there's power. And I believe there's power at City Hall now.
What are your plans for the rest of the night, for the next 12 hours? And
My,
for your staff? And will you all still be?
We just had a long meeting with all of the agencies to make sure they have the support that they need. They'll all reassemble here at 8, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and some of the critical people will stay here throughout the night, and we'll have representatives here, and I'll be here for a while longer.
Mr. Mayor, are you concerned about asbestos contamination?
The health department has done tests, and at this point is not concerned. But so far, all the tests that we've done do not show an undue amount of asbestos. Doesn't show any particular chemical agent that we have to be concerned about. The accumulation of it for people who are down there can become very, very irritating. And there were a lot of people whose eyes have been burned, but I don't think there's any chemical agent that we have to worry about at this point.
Do you have any idea how many police officers and firefighters you are missing?
Yes, we have an idea of how many we're missing.
Can you tell us that?
Well, it's a lot. It's a lot. A lot of firefighters and a lot of police officers, and I don't know that. I really don't want to get into a numbers game until we know. It's a lot. It's a lot.
There are also reports that there are some top brass in both departments who are missing.
Yes, we lost the deputy chief of the fire department and the chief of the department.
The chief of the fire department.
The chief of the fire department. The first deputy commissioner, Feehan. Deputy Commissioner Feehan, Chief Gansey, Father Judge, and Ray Downey, who I just gave a party for at Gracie Mansion for his years of service to the fire department, who led our team in the Oklahoma City bombing rescue. We've also lost him.
This must be very difficult for you, Mr. Mayor.
It's very difficult, not just for me, for the fire commissioner, and there were some other very close friends that are missing right now.
Have you had to speak to their families?
I haven't been able to speak to their families yet.
Mr. Mayor, advice again to New Yorkers who are still concerned about going to work and things like that.
The very best thing would be to stay home tomorrow. If you have to come to work, and you work north of 14th Street, then you can come to work if it's critical. So if it's important and it's critical, then you come to work. But if you can stay home tomorrow, you're going to make things easier on yourself and easier on the city if you stay home. So the city is not officially closed. Manhattan is not officially closed north of 14th Street. But we're advising people if you can stay home, it would be better. Outside of Manhattan, you go to work and do all the things you would normally do. There's no particular reason to be constricted in activities there. But if you can stay out of the city, that would be good.
Any idea when the airports will reopen?
I believe not before 2 o'clock tomorrow, but that was the report we had a while earlier. So at least closed until then.
Mr. Mayor, Arab Americans for Peace issued a statement condemning the attack and asking for Americans and New Yorkers to withhold judgment until after an investigation has been completed. But they're also concerned about the fact that Muslim communities here in New York will be targeted for harassment both by law enforcement officials and by community members because of the nature of the attack.
Just the opposite. They will receive extra protection. That's the point of what I was saying earlier. Nobody should engage in group blame. The reality is, whoever is responsible for this, law enforcement will figure that out. The United States government will figure it out, and the retaliation will be, I'm sure, very, very strong, and make an example out of those people. But nobody should try to make that determination on their own. Nobody should blame any group of people or any nationality or any ethnic group. The particular individuals responsible and the groups responsible, that's up to law enforcement, and it's up to the United States government to figure out. And citizens of New York should, even if they have anger, which is understandable, and very, very strong emotions about this, It isn't their place to get involved in this. Then they're just participating in the kind of activity we just witnessed. And New Yorkers are not like that. So we're sensitive to that. The police department will have special patrols in those areas of the city, and anybody that tries to do anything like that will be arrested.
Mr. Mayor, is there anything you could say to put to rest some of the fears people have?
Everything is being done to try to make the city as secure as possible. The president, the FBI, federal government, the state, the governor, the New York City Police Department, law enforcement authorities, everything is being done that can be done. And people tonight should say a prayer for the people that we've lost, and be grateful that we're all here. And tomorrow, New York is going to be here, and we're going to rebuild, and we're going to be stronger than we were before.
Last question. Police Commissioner Carrick, did you lose any top people in your department?
No, not to my knowledge, not at this point. We have suffered losses. There was a contingent of cops that was with the mayor and I, and Chief Ganji and First Deputy Meehan. The mayor and I left them. We were gone about 10 minutes when that portion of the building fell, and I had a number of people there. We haven't found them yet, so I don't know the numbers. I don't know yet.
We're still hopeful that we're gonna find people,
and we
have not given up hope that we're gonna be able to find some people.
We do know there are people in the building that are alive. We know that for a fact.
How do you know?
I can't get into it right now, but we do know there are people in the building that are alive, and we're making every effort to get to them.
Are those members of those police officers, Commissioner?
Excuse me?
Are those police officers?
There are some police officers, yes.
How many? Which building are they in?
Two that we know of.
How many? Two?
Two.
Do you know which building they're in?
Which building?
I can't say right now.
Have police officers been pulled from the rubble already, alive?
Yes, there are a number of people that were taken to the hospitals.
Can people be heard from
Yes.
inside the rubble? Is that how you know? Can people be heard?
I can't get into it right now.
We
Thank
have a group of shelters that are available in Manhattan. Bayard Rustin High School, Seward Park High School, Washington Irving High School, the High School of Fashion Industry, Chelsea High School, Norman Thomas, the City School, JS 22, IS 131, Comprehensive Day and Night. They're all open for people that may need shelter tonight. And we'll put out this list, as well as Curtis High School in Staten Island and Westinghouse High School in Brooklyn. So we'll put out this list, and these shelters are all available to people who may be displaced. Thank you.
That was Mayor Rudy Giuliani in a late evening press conference in New York discussing the events of the day and the precautions taken by the city. This is the end of Larry King Live, but I did want to say a word and hold Tim O'Brien over too about Barbara Olson. Barbara appeared on this show many times, as you know. Sometimes her opinions could be infuriating, but you could not love her. You could not love her. She was just... Barbara was a doll. Would you agree, Tim? Is Tim O'Brien there? Wouldn't you agree that she was a special lady? Oh, I'm sorry, Tim is not there. I thought he had stayed over. Anyway, she was a special lady. We will all miss her. I can't imagine doing one of our panel debates and not having Barbara Olson. And to her wonderful husband, Ted, the condolences of all of us here at CNN. We'll be back tomorrow night. Stay tuned for a CNN special report, America Under Attack.
Now, a CNN special report, America Under Attack. Here's Paula Zahn in New York, Wolf Blitzer in Washington, and Bill Hemmer in Atlanta.
Good evening, everyone. You've heard some of our leaders calling today one of the worst days in American history. You are joining us now some 13 hours after two hijacked commercial airlines crashed into the World Trade Center, taking down the North Tower, taking down the South Tower, as well as an adjoining building. Some 50,000 people worked in this complex. As I look behind me tonight, a disturbing sight. And after we look at the shot, we will try to fast forward to this evening. No trace of what used to be the tallest buildings in New York City, just a smoldering black hole. The Empire State Building, now the tallest building in the city. The strikes happened 18 minutes apart, the first one at 8:45. By 10:30, both towers had collapsed. An untold number of victims are still trapped inside the wreckage of the building. Mayor Giuliani and the police chief confirming they believe there are people who are still alive. Unfortunately, rescue workers cannot get to them at this hour because of falling debris, because of smoke, and because of structures of buildings that might continue to collapse. Mayor Giuliani said the death toll could be horrendous. He said the numbers are going to be very, very high. What we can tell you tonight is the city is confirming that some 265 firefighters are believed to be dead. The police chief saying among the dead, the chief of the fire department as well as the deputy chief, some 85 police officers missing tonight. CNN's Peter Viles takes us back to the start of this dreadful day. I need to warn you, the pictures are graphic. Some of you might find them disturbing.
Just before 9 a.m. Eastern, Americans awakened to shocking pictures from New York.
I just saw the entire top part of the World Trade Center explode.
Minutes earlier at 8:45, a hijacked plane had slammed into one of the World Trade Center towers. 9:03 a.m., a sickening sight. Oh my God! A second plane crashes into the Trade Center.
See the damage to that about the middle of the building. Just incredible what we are witnessing here.
People on the ground look on in horror as workers in the Trade Center towers fall, or maybe even jump to their deaths. 9:30 a.m., the president in Florida.
Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
The airport's being evacuated. They need to go home.
9:40, all American airports have been closed, but there are still planes in the sky. And minutes later, one of them crashes into the Pentagon.
Several Army officers I talked to reported hearing a big explosion, seeing shards of metal.
9:59, as the Pentagon burns, the South Tower of the World Trade Center buckles and collapses. 10:29, the second Trade Center tower collapses. An American landmark is in ruins.
Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car.
Thousands feared dead, lower Manhattan shrouded in smoke and debris. 10:48, police in western Pennsylvania confirmed that a fourth hijacked plane crashed a half hour earlier outside Pittsburgh.
Enormous loss of life there.
Noon, shock and disbelief. As the dead and wounded are taken to East Coast hospitals, officials in New York and Washington report a shortage of blood and appeal to Americans to donate their blood. Late afternoon, New Yorkers are evacuating lower Manhattan by the thousands. Parts of the city unrecognizable. A third building at the Trade Center, this one 47 stories, collapses. At Bellevue Hospital, an official says, quote, "It is a catastrophe of unparalleled proportions." Peter Viles, CNN, New York.
And if you were with us through Mayor Giuliani's news conference, you can see how tough it is for anybody to sort out the magnitude of what this city endured as well as what Washington endured today. I was on the phone earlier with a city official who believes the death toll will go into the thousands. Once again, that is impossible to even get a sense of the number of injuries and the number of deaths because of the fact that rescuers simply cannot get in to that perimeter area surrounding the World Trade Center because of fears of further structural collapse. I wanted to let you know what we can also tell you New Yorkers can expect in the morning. The city from 14th Street down will be closed off to civilians at least until Thursday. All New York City public schools, parochial schools, and private schools will be closed tomorrow. All, as I mentioned, all businesses below 14th Street will be closed as well. The nation's airports have been completely shut down at least until noon Eastern on Wednesday. The stock markets, as you can see on the screen, will also be closed. And you know that the news from the Asian markets that are now opening is not good, opening to a 17-year low. But once again, New Yorkers are going to wake up to a skyscape they barely recognized. The two towering World Trade Towers no longer exist. And Wolf, throughout the next hour, we will hope to be bringing you more information from some of the trauma centers in the area that are trying to treat patients. We know for a fact some 300 victims are being treated at St. Vincent's Hospital, and we're going to go to our reporter live there to get a better sense of what their condition is at the moment.
Paula, President Bush was very succinct in his remarks tonight, insisting, quote, "Today our nation saw evil," confirming the worst fears when he said this: thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. He began this day on a routine assignment in Florida, promoting his education agenda when he got the word of the plane crash, the plane attack on the World Trade Center towers in Manhattan. He was immediately flown shortly thereafter to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana for security considerations. His security personnel not believing it was safe yet to return to Washington. From Barksdale, he was flown to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, home of the Strategic Command, where he remained for several hours, participated in a telephone conference call with his national security advisors. Eventually, it was determined that it was safe for him to return to Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington. He came in under unprecedented escort protection from F-15s and F-16s, eventually landing at Air Force Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington. We're taking a look at some of those escorts that accompanied Air Force One on the way to back to Washington. And once he landed at Andrews, he was flown by Marine One, the Marine helicopter, to the south lawn of the White House. Once again, almost unprecedented decoy helicopters, Marine helicopters, joining him in order to get to the White House. The president spoke for just under 5 minutes, and he spoke from the heart.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington which had to be evacuated today are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
President Bush speaking at the White House almost 2 hours ago from the Oval Office, his first nationally televised Oval Office address. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, is at the White House. John, from that address, the president met with his top national security advisors. What do we know about that meeting?
That's right, Wolf. The president immediately proceeded to that meeting at the White House Situation Room. It lasted a little under an hour, we are told. On the national security side, the president was brought up to speed on U.S. military deployments around the world, including the status of U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf region, as well as the deployment today of naval vessels from Norfolk, Virginia, up along the eastern seaboard of the United States. Also, that meeting was expanded beyond the normal national security meeting in a way to take into account the devastating effect of this tragedy. The Transportation Secretary, the Health and Human Services Secretary, and the Director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency brought into that meeting as well to discuss with the President and his national security team the steps the federal government is taking to try to deal with the devastation of this. Now, we are told from sources earlier today that senior administration officials told key members of Congress that they are, quote, certain, based on the evidence they have gathered so far, confident based on the evidence gathered so far, that people and organizations associated with Osama bin Laden are responsible for this. But coming out of the national security meeting tonight, I was told by a senior administration official they do not want to jump to conclusions here. The administration will say nothing publicly about that. This official saying, quote, we're going to take a little time to sort this out. So the president being briefed by his team, he is here at the White House tonight. That meeting is now over, but look for the president tomorrow to have more public events. The goal here is to send reassuring signals to the American people. We are told the first order of business tomorrow is a bipartisan meeting with the congressional leadership here at the White House. Wolf.
And John, the president was also sending a very powerful signal to the enemies of the United States when he said this. Let me read this line from his speech. He said, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them," which suggests that some states may eventually be paying a price if the U.S. concludes that they were responsible as well.
It certainly does. The president's very strong words there come at a time this administration and especially the prior administration had been criticized for some by not taking stronger actions against the governments that have provided safe harbor and financial support to Osama bin Laden. Again, the administration publicly not assigning any blame, but we do know from the intelligence briefings provided to key members of Congress that is the administration's, at least the preliminary conclusion. Again, 3 sources I spoke to on Capitol Hill say administration officials used the word confident that the evidence they were gathering so far pointed to the bin Laden organization. Wolf.
All right, John King, stand by at the White House. I want to bring in our military affairs correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. He's at the Pentagon, which saw devastation there as well. Jamie, first of all, what do we know about the casualty count at the Pentagon.
Well, Wolf, just a short time ago, we got the first estimate of how high the death toll may be here at the Pentagon. It could be as many as 800 people killed, according to Arlington County fire officials, who say they've been told by Pentagon officials that the range of missing persons here is somewhere between 100 and 800. So that's the range that the death toll could take here at the Pentagon. Arlington County fire officials also say that the work tonight, as the fire continue to burn here at the Pentagon, is to remove some of the debris, take some of the front of the facade off so that firefighters can go in the morning in full force and try to put out what remains of the fires that, as I said, are still burning here more than 13 hours after the crash took place. Now, in addition, Pentagon officials insist that they're going to have the building open in the morning, at least large portions of the building on the other side that were not affected by this incident, as a symbol that the fact that the U.S. military headquarters has not been shut down by this terrorist action. Wolf?
And Jamie, just to remind our viewers, about 20,000 people on a daily basis go to work at the Pentagon, which is, of course, just outside of Washington. It was the Army section of the Pentagon that took the brunt of this attack, wasn't it?
Well, actually, it hit at the 4th corridor, if you're familiar with the Pentagon from your Pentagon days, in an area that had just been renovated. That actually is an area where there are a lot of Navy offices. There were also a lot of Army offices along this side of the Pentagon over here that was also affected by the blaze. A couple of interesting notes. One is that this marks a dividing line between where the Pentagon was just completed being renovated and another area that they were just about to start on. That meant that there were fewer people in both of those sections. In one case, because some people had not yet moved into new offices. In other case, because they had just moved out of old offices. And in the new area, which is on this side and didn't burn as much, some of the new improved fire security systems helped a lot, including a sprinkler system that was installed on one side of the Pentagon, had not been installed on the other. That was a big help in keeping the fire down.
And Jamie, while we have you, what have you been hearing about troop deployments by the military in the aftermath of this attack?
Well, I've only heard of one significant move so far, and that is the decision to hold the USS Enterprise aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf region. The Enterprise had just been relieved by the Carl Vinson in the Persian Gulf and was on its way home. Pentagon sources tell me that orders have been sent to the ship to hold up, to stay in the area of the Arabian Sea and await further orders, a signal that the United States may have something in mind in terms of some sort of a military reaction. Wolf?
Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. All right, please stand by. I want to go down to Bill Hemmer in Atlanta. He has more on this devastating day. Bill?
Yeah, Wolf, thank you. On a normal day, and underscore the word normal because we are far from that at this point. On a normal day, any airline that will go down the U.S. would be given what we would consider wall-to-wall coverage. But today in western Pennsylvania, just another element, another aspect of this still unfolding tragic story. To David Mattingly near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where United Airlines Flight 93 went down this morning about 10:20 a.m. David, good evening again to you.
Good evening, Bill. We are officially in the tiny town of Stony Creek Township, Pennsylvania. That's just outside Shanksville, southeast of Pittsburgh. The FBI here at the crash scene will confirm only one thing, that there were 38 passengers and 7 crewmen aboard the United 757 when it crashed here in a field of an old strip mining area. Officials at this location have been reluctant to call it an act of terrorism until evidence is uncovered that actually indicates this. In the meantime, there are hundreds of state troopers and emergency personnel securing the crash site, calling it a crime scene in preparation of a federal investigation. Now, witnesses in the area said the plane hit the ground at a 45-degree angle, causing a tremendous explosion, rattling windows miles away from here. All that's left of the 757 appears to be small pieces of debris, raising concerns that the investigation here on the ground could be a long and difficult one. Of course, the search is on for the all-important black box, the flight recorder. There is also a great deal of interest in what could be another key piece of evidence if it proves to be authentic. A 911 call originating from the plane and taken by a 911 operator in a Pennsylvania county just west of here That tape is now in the hands of the FBI. If it proves to be authentic, it could be the lone surviving voice of an eyewitness on board that ill-fated aircraft. And with it, maybe some answers about what happened on board the airplane, and maybe some answers as to why this plane crashed here in this field instead of into another terrorist target. Now, Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge surveyed the area earlier today, calling on Pennsylvanians to offer prayer and cooperation. As night fell, we began to see trucks coming by with trailers loaded with equipment that looked like communications equipment and lighting equipment, obviously preparing for a lengthy investigation here. Bill.
All right, David, thank you. David Mattingly in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Throughout the evening here, the human face has been put on this tragedy in more ways than one. We're starting to get an idea of some of the people who were on board the various flights that took off today, a partial list of some of the better recognized names on board. David Angel and his wife Lynn from Pasadena, California. The executive producer of NBC's Frasier, Wings, and Cheers was on board one of those planes. Daniel Lewin, 31 years old, co-founder of Akamai Technologies. Garnett Bailey, his friends called him Ace, director of scouting for the LA Kings, the National Hockey League. Also Mark Bavis, also a scout with the LA Kings. And throughout the night, you've heard the name Barbara Olson being mentioned several times, a frequent contributor to Larry King Live and CNN through her legal commentary. Outside of that, we're also starting to pick up different stories across the country, repercussions from this story, indication that some gas lines in different parts of the country are snaking more than an hour or more in length. Also an indication that some people are afraid of a supply disruption. Nothing confirmed on a disruption of supply, but as a result, some gas stations in Dallas, Texas, $5 a gallon. Indianapolis, $5 a gallon. Parts of Ohio, also $5 a gallon for gasoline at this point. Here in the state of Georgia, getting reports at various grocery stores and supermarkets that people flock to the groceries today, stocking up on water and canned goods. We don't say this out of fear or try to incite some sort of fear or worry or concern. It's just the reports we're getting from people and the way they are reacting to what we have seen now for the past 13 and a half hours, originating this morning about 9 a.m. Eastern Time in New York City. Speaking of New York, back to Manhattan and Paula Zahn. Paula.
Thanks, Bill. I think people here are just beginning to grasp the sheer horror and tragedy of the multiple attacks on this city today. Once again, the first hijacked jet is slamming into the World Trade Center about 8:45, the second attack about 18 minutes later. And one of the more chilling developments tonight, both the mayor of New York City and the police chief confirming they have reason to believe that people are still alive and trapped inside the wreckage of the two collapsed towers, as well as an adjoining building, Building 7, that made up a part of that World Trade complex. The Firefighters Union confirming tonight that 265 firefighters presumed dead. The police chief confirming tonight that the city of New York lost its fire chief as well as its deputy fire chief, some 85 New York police officers missing. Some presume them to be dead. We know that in area hospitals, according to the mayor, some 600 patients or victims are now being treated. Part of the challenge in getting to what the mayor believes to be potential victims who may still be alive is the fact that there's a tremendous amount of smoke still billowing from the collapsed towers. There is still so much structural damage. They're fearful that rescuers could go in there and get injured again, as well as the fumes. It is not clear when any rescuers will be allowed to penetrate this perimeter area. The mayor confirming tonight that the fatalities will be horrendous. The numbers, he told us, will be, quote, very, very high. Right now, we are going to listen to Maria Hinojosa's report, who will give you a perspective on exactly what happened after these initial attacks and how New Yorkers reacted to them.
At Ground Zero, running in the streets is the only form of escape. But on those same streets, the chaos and vibrations couldn't be avoided. Further north, New Yorkers gathered at Times Square in humble silence and disbelief, everyone looking up to the big screen. Downtown, the mass exodus began.
I saw everybody crying in the streets.
saying their prayers and crying. I saw different races, nationalities, and creeds that usually have differences with one another come together and bond and love and respect.
Along Fifth Avenue, people flooded to the streets to watch together.
Oh my God, it's inside the first building.
The faces of New Yorkers, solemn, quiet, praying. A father trying to give security to the innocent ones. The tiniest of faces protected. Streets filled with anger and shock.
I have never witnessed nothing like this in my entire life. Human beings, parents, daughters and sons jumping out of the window at least from 80-something floor. None of you want to witness that. I'm traumatized for life.
The street where now everyone shares the pain out in the open without shame. The street where office chairs have become eerie stretchers outside a hospital.
We've had multiple types of injuries, from severe burns to blunt injuries and multiple fractures.
The street where a depleted mayor summons some strength.
New York City is a lot stronger than this, and we're going to overcome it, and the people of New York City are going to give an example of how you stand up to terrorism. You just don't be afraid.
But Times Square is empty, the streets are silent, and a city mourns. Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
And I think it is fair to say millions of people were in a state of shock today based on the conversations I've had with people who witnessed this attack. That state of shock is turning to outrage. Joining me right now is Scott Hess and Jennifer Ruth, both of whom were working in the area at the time. I should make it clear before we go any further, some 50,000 people worked in the World Trade Center area. You were not far from there. Both of you were evacuated from your workplaces. What did you see, Jennifer?
I work at the 3 World Financial Center on the 35th floor, and my cubicle faces the World Trade Center. And we saw the hind end of something entering the building and the gaping hole through the building, and then the debris starting to fall. So we then evacuated and crossed the street and saw the second plane before it actually hit the building. And at that point, everyone panicked and screamed and started running north on West Side Highway.
Now, at that point, police obviously had not blocked off streets, so you were able to run as fast as you could.
Right.
What do you remember about what you saw earlier today?
After we evacuated the building, the first tower was on fire, and we saw bodies either leaping or falling from the upper floors, and it was just a chilling scene. And a few minutes later, almost in a very surreal action, the second plane, and I could almost see that it was a United plane, I thought, just
that
smashed.
Actually has been confirmed this evening.
Smashed right into the building, and people were just screaming and crying, and it was just, the fire just, started to explode.
Some of the police officials have said tonight that they were surprised about how orderly the evacuations were, not only from your 2 buildings, you'd expect those to be more orderly than those of the World Trade Center bombings, but that isn't exactly what you experienced on the street.
There was a little more panic on the street. For the most part, things were fairly organized once we got up to the West Side Highway, but there was just people grieving and crying, and some of the schools were being evacuated. There's a bit of panic there, but overall, I think people just needed to get north and just get out of the area.
You saw, as you said, the first attack. You also saw the second plane slam into the South Tower. You heard the mayor tonight say that they have reason to believe that people are still alive in that wreckage. Are either one of you that optimistic based on what you saw? You were very close.
It was very close, but I couldn't see. I left before I was able to escape the scene before the buildings actually fell. And so I don't know what it looked like after that point. People were still evacuating and had the opportunity to get out as I was getting out. So,
most companies are advising people not to go to work tomorrow. All the public schools, private schools, parochial schools will be closed. As you wake up tomorrow morning, I'm sure you have no sense of what that day will be like that awaits you. But give us a preview of what you think it might be like.
Yeah, just walking down to getting off the subway and looking at the World Trade Center for basically the last 18 or 19 years, every day, it's just not there anymore. And walking up the West Side Highway, just turning around on a continuous basis, they were just not there anymore, and just seeing this bellowing smoke.
It is so eerie out there right now, and one of the things that I was impressed by today is there was a plea made for people to donate blood. And I went late this morning to donate blood, and the lines were wrapped around the block. And I'm told at some hospitals there were 4- and 5-hour waits to donate blood. This does not surprise you, does it?
No, not at all. And everyone has been so affected by this just immediately on the streets. As soon as I got home after the incident, everyone was glum and quiet on the streets. People stayed outside to see if they could get a view, but it was just complete quiet.
Well, Jennifer and Steve, we appreciate your dropping by. We know that not only has this been a very traumatic day for you, but as Senator Warner said earlier today, one of the worst days in American history. You're very lucky to be alive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right now, we're going to check in with Rose Arce, who is one of our producers who has basically been at Ground Zero most of the day. We find her right now at St. Vincent's Hospital, where several hundred people are being treated right now. Rose, give us an update if you would.
Yes, Paula, I'm actually right here on 8th Avenue, and right over my left shoulder, you would see the Twin Towers on any other night clearly, but tonight there's nothing. It's completely dark. I spent most of the day about 2 blocks from there on the top floor of a building that's just north of the World Trade Center. From there we could see people rushing to the windows as fire was billowing out of the top of the building where the first airplane hit. People were rushing to the windows. They were taking clothes. One thing looked like a blanket that they were waving. And then suddenly there was an explosion, and you saw folks start to jump out the front window of the building and plunge. I saw at least 6 people do this. Folks were pushing each other. Some people were screaming for help and then just falling out. There was chaos on the ground. You could see emergency workers rushing to the scene of the building. Right now it's pretty quiet behind me, but this is an emergency route right over here, 8th Avenue. It's a straight shot from the World Trade Center uptown, and we've been watching emergency vehicles rushing right by us into the hospital that's right up the street.
Rose, I want to make a clarification now. The police chief earlier reported that they believe there were people alive, and most people interpreted that as alive in the wreckage of the World Trade Center. The police commissioner is issuing clarifications that says they believe there were people alive in nearby buildings downtown, not the Trade Center. Once again, neither officials at the Pentagon or officials here in the city can confirm the magnitude of the tragedy witnessed here in New York City and in Washington today, but once again the mayor says the statistics will be horrendous and the number of deaths will be very, very high. It's time to go back to Washington now, and Wolf.
Thank you, Paula. We're getting some new information now from our Susan Candiotti in Miami. She's reporting that the FBI has begun the process, or will soon begin the process, of executing search warrants in more than one location in South Florida, including what she says are the homes and post office boxes of several individuals. This is in response, Susan Candiotti is reporting, to information gleaned from the investigation into today's terrorist attacks in New York and here in Washington. One source tells Susan this: we're looking at South Florida ties to some of the people we're looking at. That's because, she says, authorities are basing their investigation on the passenger manifests of these hijacked airliners, 4 of them today, and they're taking information from other sources as well. We'll be following this. One additional note, she says a search will also be done in Daytona, Florida. Susan Candiotti will be joining us shortly. I do want to report once again what she's saying, that the FBI has begun the process of search warrants in South Florida as well as Daytona. Susan is now on the phone with us. Susan, tell us, give us a perspective. What exactly do you know is going on?
It's my understanding, according to a law enforcement source, Wolf, that the FBI is in the process of executing search warrants. That is to say, in the process of putting the paperwork together. The execution of them may not begin until the morning or early morning hours. What they are going to be executing these search warrants are homes, as well as some may only be post office boxes, I am told. They are basing the information on the request for a search warrant on information coming from passenger manifests of the aircraft involved, among other information they have by talking to various other sources. I am told, quote, we are looking at South Florida ties to some of the people that we're looking at. When I asked if they are looking at names on the manifest that may only turn out to be passengers, I was told, no, we are basing our search warrants on more information than that. They are looking at more than one location, I am told, in South Florida, as well as other locations in Central and or North Florida, including Daytona Beach. Wolf?
Susan Candiotti in Miami, thank you very much. And our Jonathan Karl, our congressional correspondent, has been talking with members of Congress who also have been receiving intelligence briefings. John, tell us what you're hearing now.
Well, Wolf, I'm outside the Capitol Police headquarters here on Capitol Hill, where Attorney General and also the FBI director have both been briefing about 75 members of Congress. I can tell you that in general, the one bit of information here is that they believe, according to the Attorney General told members of Congress, that these were teams of 3 to 5 operating on each one of these planes, and that they believe that in each one of the cases where they have direct information, they were armed only with knives. Besides that, members of Congress that I've spoken to that were in this briefing expressing frustration at the lack of information. They wanted to know, about the plane that went down outside of Pittsburgh. They wanted to know where was that plane's destination. They wanted to know more about the nationalities of those that were involved with this attack. And they said they got essentially no new information on any of that. But again, the one thing that they did get out of this was that, according to the Attorney General, what the Attorney General told the members of Congress here, those were teams of 3 to 5 operating on each one of those planes. Now, there will be another extraordinary briefing of law enforcement officials tomorrow at 12:30 on the floor of the House of Representatives, because every member of the House and Senate, for that matter, obviously wants to get briefed, wants to get these questions answered. So there will be a closed briefing on the floor of the House, we are told, tomorrow at 12:30 with law enforcement officials.
Jonathan Karl, so many questions and still so few answers. Thanks so much for joining us. And I want to bring in now the former UN ambassador, United States ambassador to the United Nations and Energy Secretary during the Clinton administration, Bill Richardson, who was one of the last high-ranking U.S. officials to actually go to Afghanistan and meet with Taliban leaders. He met with them in late 1997. And also Julie Serz, a former U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency analyst, a specialist on the Taliban and Afghanistan and Osama bin Laden. And first to you, Secretary Richardson, what is your sense right now, knowing the Taliban, knowing Osama bin Laden, hearing these reports, what do you believe that Osama bin Laden was responsible for this?
My gut feeling, Wolf, is yes, that every indicator, which is similar to the bombing of our 2 embassies, to the USS Cole, the modus operandi, the 3 to 5, that most likely it is Osama bin Laden. I believe that intelligence is also indicating that he's now in Afghanistan. If that is the case, I think this new policy makes sense, and that is that any nation that harbors such a terrorist would also be the beneficiary of a retaliatory effort by the United States. My view, again, is that the Taliban have been playing this game, that we contain him. When I met with him, they said he's not perpetrating any terrorist acts, he's under our control. That is not the case. He operates in a wide network throughout Afghanistan, other countries. I think it is critically important that if he is in Afghanistan, that he be turned over, that he be brought to a swift retaliatory effort.
Julie Serz, you're a former DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency analyst specializing in Afghanistan and the Taliban and Osama bin Laden. What's your take?
I agree with Ambassador Richardson and the other experts that I know you've had on throughout the day that, yes, all the indicators do seem to point to Osama bin Laden being responsible for this attack. And yes, I also agree with Ambassador Richardson that the Taliban, and as the President said, share at least equal responsibility in this act if that does turn out to be the case that bin Laden is behind it. Taliban officials have claimed after the 1998 embassy bombings, after the Cole attack, that bin Laden could somehow be controlled by them, and I think this shows, if anything, that they're working with him, that they're cooperating with him, that's perhaps even the best way to understand bin Laden's organization, that it includes not just bin Laden and this extremist network worldwide, but is very much helped by the safe haven the Taliban provide, and even by the assistance of some neighboring countries, including particularly Pakistan. I think it needs to be said now. It's something many of us American officials have believed, and private experts on the subject as well.
Well, let me ask Ambassador Richardson, do you believe Pakistan should share some of the responsibility if, in fact, Osama bin Laden is proven to have been responsible for these attacks?
Yes, there's no question that the Pakistanis have a lot of influence on the Taliban. When I visited the Taliban, it was arranged by the Pakistanis, who have a lot of leverage over them, territorial, financial. I think it's important that the international community rally behind the United States. NATO, nations like Pakistan, others that have influence with the Taliban in Central Asia. This should be an international responsibility. This is an attack on the international community, not just the United States. The United Nations needs to be involved. We need to have a multinational effort, but the United States should lead that. If they are the perpetrators, they should be the recipients. The Osama bin Laden organization, the whole network, of a very strong retaliatory strike.
All right, Ambassador Bill Richardson, Julie Sears, I want to thank both of you for joining us. We have to leave it right there. And Paula, before we go to you, just to recap the headline from our Jonathan Karl, reporting on a briefing that the Attorney General John Ashcroft gave members of Congress that the U.S. government now believes teams of 3 to 5 individuals carrying knives commandeered those 4 airliners earlier today, destroying them and themselves in the process. Paula?
Thanks, Wolf. The city here is still paralyzed by the impact of the terrorist attacks here earlier today, and somewhat chilled by what the mayor of the city has just shared with us. He said he believes the fatality numbers will be horrendous, and that they will be, in quote, very high indeed. We do need to clarify one thing that the police commissioner told us was misinterpreted coming out of that news conference that he just held with the mayor. We were led to believe that police officials thought that there were people alive in the World Trade Center. That apparently is not the case. The police commissioner is now reiterating that he believes there are indeed people alive in nearby buildings downtown. Now, once again, to understand the impact of these 2 explosions. The crashes happened 18 minutes apart. Within an hour and a half, both the North Tower and the South Tower of the World Trade Center had collapsed. An adjoining building collapsed at 6 o'clock tonight. There's a lot of debris in the area. Rescuers cannot get into the World Trade Center perimeter. We can confirm, though, 600 people are being treated in area hospitals. We're going to go to Greg Clarkin right now, who is at St. Vincent's Hospital, where a large number of those victims were taken. Greg?
Hi there, Paula. We are indeed very close to St. Vincent's Hospital, and this is one of the trauma and triage centers in Lower Manhattan. They tell us they have treated about 327 patients. They have 3 fatalities at St. Vincent's. Now, here to help us sort it out and describe what it was like inside St. Vincent's is Dr. Andrew Feldman. He's the chief of sports medicine, and he has been at work at St. Vincent's now for upwards of 10 hours. Doctor, can you give us some sense of the type of injuries we saw first off in St. Vincent's?
Well, there's a whole host of injuries, anything you'd see in any other kind of major trauma. Obviously, a lot of broken bones, cuts and bruises, but a lot of blunt trauma, chest trauma, head trauma, things like that.
And what type of infrastructure, what type of system was in place to kind of deal with the influx of victims that we saw today?
Well, at St. Vincent's, we're a level 1 trauma center, which means we're prepared to do this type of stuff. We take care of a lot of accident victims in New York, and we have for many years. And I'm very proud of the staff and the other doctors in the facility for how they handled this. But basically, we are really set up for this type of environment.
Have they given you any kind of expectations, what's in store for you tomorrow? Any kind of heads up, any tips to what you might be in for?
It's basically more of the same, because obviously there's thousands and thousands of people to dig out, and all of them are going to have some sort of an injury. And basically, since we're so close to the World Center, that they'll be coming our way. Yeah.
And the injuries will shift to a different type, correct, as they start to pull people out of here?
Well, I mean, the longer people are buried, I think the more severe the injury, and there's going to be a lot of smoke and gas inhalation, and people are going to be dealing with that in the next 12 to 24 hours, I believe.
Dr. Feldman, thanks very much for joining us. And Paula, that was the view of one gentleman who's inside St. Vincent's. Again, they've treated 327 people, 3 fatalities. Paula, back to you.
Thanks so much, Greg. We can confirm that there is a desperate plea for New Yorkers to donate blood, and every indication is that New Yorkers are doing their best to live up to that challenge. And there's some hospitals, lines wrapped around the block of people waiting in line to give blood. but indeed there is still a shortage, and the city very much wants folks who are capable of donating blood to do just that. Right now I'm going to check in with Susan Lesovich, who is out in Weehawken, New Jersey. Susan, if you would, try to set the scene for our viewers who weren't with us earlier today to help them understand, after the two towers crash, the drama of people trekking out of the city with roads closed around them, bridges closed, and how they made their way across the river to New Jersey.
Paula, it was just a surreal scene. Hoboken, New Jersey, which is where I live, is a very busy town that is directly opposite the financial district. You have buses, ferries going to the World Financial Center, which is across the street from where the World Trade Center once stood, and the PATH train, which runs underneath the Hudson River. The first stop in New York City is the World Financial Center. Instead, today, the ferries were transporting people who were fleeing for their lives. In fact, one of the cameramen that I worked with earlier today in Hoboken was just running, and they boarded the ferry. He doesn't live in New Jersey, but like many other people, just jumping onto the ferry just to get out of harm's way. The ferries were also used to transport victims as well of the smoke inhalation and other injuries. In fact, the PATH train entrance, of course, no access to New York City, was a triage center. Dozens of ambulances from all over New Jersey treating people, all the hospitals in the area on standby. I went to the Lone Hospital, St. Mary's in Hoboken, as you mentioned. In New York City, people lined up around the block, a long line as well. People lining up, giving their names and phone numbers to donate blood. The hospital was just simply overwhelmed. They said normally they take 1 or 2 people to give blood. They just simply couldn't accommodate the many volunteers that were coming forth to try to lend their hand in any way. Just a surreal scene, Paula. Jet fighters overhead. I saw a fully outfitted SWAT team in the mayor's office in Hoboken, and that was offset by one of the most beautiful days of the year, a spectacular Indian summer day. One person who was watching it with me said there's really not a cloud in the sky except for the huge billowing cloud of smoke that was coming over from the World Trade Center. Paula.
You described that beautifully, because as I stand here on this balcony tonight, it is one of those crystal clear nights and so eerie, because as I look over my shoulder where the World Trade Center once stood, there is nothing but a big black hole with smoke continuing to billow out of it. Susan, was there any sense of anger among the people you spoke with?
Oh, most definitely. But I think the overwhelming emotion is just one of shock. People were comparing it to Pearl Harbor earlier today. I think everyone recognized the magnitude of what happened. I was actually in the mayor's office in Hoboken when the building was collapsing. We had a perfect view of the building, and even while the mayor was planning this emergency of just unprecedented proportions, everybody's eyes were red-rimmed because they knew. Everybody knows somebody who got hurt. Everybody knows families of somebody who got hurt today in what we saw downtown Manhattan.
And I guess, Susan, it's this stage that we all shudder to think how many fatalities we may be facing in the days to come. Susan, thanks so much for that report.
Sure.
Before I go back to Bill Hemmer in Atlanta, just a very quick update. The mayor of the city confirming that the fatality numbers will be very, very high. One city official telling me on the phone into the thousands. People believed to be alive, trapped in buildings nearby what is left of the World Trade Centers. The mayor also confirming that tonight or earlier today, New York City not only lost its fire chief, but its deputy fire chief as well. The firefighters union confirming that 265 firefighters, those were among the first 400 first on the scene, are presumed dead. 85 police officers missing tonight. So, Bill, this is a city, as I said earlier this evening, is just beginning to grasp the magnitude of the tragedy that was endured here in this city today.
We're about 7 hours from sunup tomorrow, and indeed tomorrow the images are going to be much darker than we see tonight. Paula, thank you. Quite a bit of information to pass along to you at this point. Senior White House officials indicating to CNN the Air Traffic Control Center for the United States should be up and running tomorrow by noon Eastern time. We had been led to believe earlier today that this indeed would be the case. At this point, all air traffic in the United States for the first time in history has been shut down. But again, we're getting an indication that noon Eastern time tomorrow, air traffic control should be up and working again tomorrow. Now tonight, we continue to put a human face on this tragedy that unfolds not only in New York City and Washington and Pennsylvania, but also in San Francisco. Several of those airplanes bound for California. Our affiliate in San Francisco, KTVU, has done an interview with a woman by the name of Alice Hoagland. She's a flight attendant. Her son, Mark Bingham, was on board United Airlines Flight 93 today, bound for San Francisco. Apparently, he used the plane's airphone to call his mother in San Francisco shortly before that plane crashed in western Pennsylvania. Among other things, he told his mother that 3 men were on board and they had threatened with a bomb. Hear that interview from KTVU, Alice Hoagland, followed by Kathleen Hoagland, who is the aunt of Mark Bingham on board that flight.
That I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
I said that.
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
I got on the phone, Mark, and he said, hi, Mom, this is Mark Bingham. Giving me his last name. And he said, I want to let you know that I love you. And I'm flying. I think he said I'm in the air. I'm calling you on the airphone of the airplane.
In his seat.
I presume so. He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And I said, well, who are they, Mark? And he repeated that he loved me, and he said, I don't think he said, I don't know who they are. He became distracted there as if someone was speaking to him, and he said it's something to the effect of, it's true. And then the phone went dead.
Alice Hoagland, Kathleen Hoagland. Mark Bingham on board United Airlines Flight 93, again, that went down today with several others in western Pennsylvania. The first of many stories we'll be hearing throughout the evening and into tomorrow and the rest of the week here. Also, the brother of the pilot on American Airlines Flight 11 says he had a, quote, sinking feeling when he heard about this morning's terrorist attacks. Jim Oganowski's brother John was the pilot of the first plane to hit one of the World Trade Centers today. Flight 11 was traveling from Boston, bound for L.A., 92 people on board. Oganowski says his brother was a former Air Force pilot who had just celebrated a birthday.
I ask all of you for your prayers for, as I refer to him, as Brother John. And I ask you to also pray for our whole country today in this tragedy that's impacting our whole country.
Oganowski had a farm in the area of Boston, Massachusetts. Also at this time, we're keeping an eye on Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Why do you ask? Because in Kuala Lumpur, the Petronas Towers are located, extending 1,483 feet into the air, the tallest buildings in the world. The reports we're getting from Malaysia and through the Associated Press is that both towers have been evacuated. Apparently, another threat has been issued against those buildings, but again, there is nothing here to confirm that report. What we do know is that thousands have been led out of those towers and into the streets of Kuala Lumpur. Normally, we would not report a bomb threat, but indeed, given the circumstances of today, certainly that story out of Malaysia is relative. Back in this country, we mentioned tomorrow air traffic control should be operating, according to the White House, up and ready at noon Eastern time tomorrow. But tonight, those airports are a very different scene. I'm going to take you to 2 of them now. Bill Delaney is at Logan International in Boston, and in Los Angeles at LAX, we have CNN's Frank Buckley. First, though, to Bill in Boston, Massachusetts. Bill, good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Bill. Very eerie, of course, here since early this morning. This usually very busy airport, eerily quiet all day. Particular shock, particular impact here in Boston because, of course, the 2 planes that crashed into the World Trade Center originated here in Boston. 157 people in all killed on those planes. Dozens of their family members at a hotel right nearby me here, just outside Logan Airport at the Hilton Hotel here, being counseled. Amid the question, how could 2 planes have been infiltrated, to all appearances, by hijackers, by terrorists. Now, airport officials here tonight, Bill, insisted that Boston's Logan Airport is as safe as any in the world. But this major airport, like other major airports in the United States, has a history of allegations of lax security, particularly in the late 90s, when the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, did a particular study of Logan, a year and a half, 2 years, in which FAA officials repeatedly dressed as passengers and repeatedly breached security here. They brought guns, they brought even pipe bombs onto planes. They got onto planes locked away on the tarmac. They repeatedly breached security, some 136 violations in the late 90s here during that study, leading to some $178,000 in fines issued against Logan Airport just those couple of years ago. Now, Logan Airport enhanced its security since then. For example, there are some 300 locks that lead from terminals to tarmac here at Logan Airport. 26 of them, it was concluded, were so insecure they were subsequently permanently locked. But this an airport with notorious incidents in its past. 2 summers ago, a teenager dressed as an Hasidic Jew managed to get over a fence here, a fence with razor wire on top of it. He managed to get himself onto a London-bound airplane and made it all the way to London. Now, this airport has also repeatedly found people with possibly dangerous implements on them. The airport was shut down several months ago when a man with a gun that turned out to be harmless, was captured at a checkpoint, but the airport was shut down and people were evacuated. So the airport security here, officials tell us, is very much like security at other airports. And in fact, that FAA study, though they denounced on many levels the security here, said the security here in the late 90s was not all that different than security at many other major airports. Officials here already saying that they will probably curb check-in here as soon as the airport reopens. They will probably begin more random security checks. 28 million people go through this airport every year. Now the long, hard questioning of how this could have happened at Boston's Logan Airport. Back to you, Bill.
Bill, hang with me a second here. Curious to know your insights on a personal level, knowing that you've covered the Boston area for many years. Outside of the airport itself, what have you noticed about civilian traffic downtown, on the streets, in the stores, etc., through the course of today?
It's, of course, not on the level of the extraordinary scenes in New York, but this was a different Boston today. Traffic is something that's fundamental to life in Boston. It's always tangled throughout downtown Boston. But today, that changed dramatically. As the day wore on, it got thinner and thinner. Of course, here at the airport itself, that eeriness I described as we began our conversation, Bill, from 10 in the morning or so, people leaving the airport, and by midday, it was completely empty, as the city itself also emptied. Buses and trains, the fares were taken off buses and trains, so people could leave work and go home. School children sent home early. All public, state, federal, and city offices closed. So a very different Boston today. I'll leave you with maybe one haunting image that stuck in my mind. At this eerily quiet airport, late in the afternoon, right around dusk, one F-15 jet circling the airport. We've been unable to even figure out exactly from officials here why that jet was out here, but it left an eerie tone to an eerie day in the city of Boston. This one F-15 fighter jet circling again and again Logan Airport.
So very far from normal today. Bill Delaney in Boston. Bill, thank you. To the other end of the country, LAX, Los Angeles International Airport, 3 planes were bound for there today. CNN's Frank Buckley parked outside there this evening. Frank, what's the scene there?
Well, Bill, the same eerie scene that our colleague Delaney is describing there in Boston, the same thing here in Los Angeles, a very eerie scene at a very quiet LAX. As you say, 3 flights were bound for Los Angeles, American 11 from Boston, American 77 from Washington Dulles Airport, and United Airlines Flight 175 also from Boston. None of those planes came here, obviously, to Los Angeles today, but a few people did come to Los Angeles Airport, perhaps to greet friends and family who are going to be getting off those planes, perhaps just to come to get information after hearing of the tragedies. They came, they were understandably shaken up. We will spare you the intrusion into their private grief. We will not show you that video, but we will show you the view inside of LAX as it was being evacuated. As the airport was being closed today, they also evacuated not just the American and United Airlines terminals, but also the Bradley International Terminal. In fact, all of the terminals were evacuated here at LAX. LAX was closed, no flights in or out, and that affected thousands of passengers. On an average day, there are some 160,000 passengers on 2,100 flights that go in and out of this airport. By this afternoon, however, LAX was completely empty, except for the security personnel and key personnel that were needed to keep the facility operating. Those thousands of passengers stranded by all of this were still searching for hotel rooms late into the day. I was talking to a hotel manager nearby who was telling me the story of seeing pathetic scenes of passengers pushing those yellow carts with their luggage up Century Boulevard right near the airport, going from hotel to hotel trying to get accommodations. As far as we know, most or all of them have found some sort of accommodations. We've talked to some hotel managers who've told us that the airlines have provided for those accommodations for some of the people here. We do know that only one flight arrived into LAX this evening after the airport was closed down. The FAA confirming that a lone American flight was allowed to come in at 6:30 p.m. local time to assist in the grief effort here at LAX. Bill?
Frank, and quickly here, don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you've covered the LA area. Bill Delaney was relaying some of the concerns at Boston's Logan International Airport about security concerns there. Have there been concerns at LAX as well?
Well, there have been at times, and we've had situations here over the years in which people have somehow breached security, gone through the metal detector, and they've had to actually evacuate an entire terminal of the airport, and getting everyone out of the terminal because someone had somehow gone through the metal detection system. They felt that there was a security alert there, and by the time the personnel had caught up with that person was gone. So yes, there have been concerns along those lines over the years, even here at LAX.
All right, Frank, and again, as the White House is indicating, they expect air traffic control to be operating again tomorrow at noon Eastern time, which means 9 a.m. West Coast time. So Frank, it is quite possible LAX could get back to some sense of normalcy by your time tomorrow morning. Frank Buckley in LA, Bill Delaney in Boston. Now Wolf Blitzer again in Washington, D.C. Wolf.
Thank you very much, Bill. And I want to bring in three experts on national security now who have been monitoring today's dramatic developments. Here in Washington, Senator Chris Dodd, he's chairman of the Senate Rules Committee, but he's also a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In Los Angeles, the former Secretary of State Warren Christopher, who served during the first term of the Clinton administration. And also here in Washington, Jim Steinberg, the former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Clinton. Now, let me begin with you, Senator Dodd. When we spoke on Sunday, when I interviewed you on Sunday on Late Edition, you made the point that the president's National Missile Defense Shield was not really targeted at the real threat facing the United States. What you said you worried much more about was a terrorist attack against a U.S. target, specifically in New York. Was someone asleep at the switch?
Well, look, tonight we're going to worry about these families. The human dimension, the loss is staggering. The president, everyone's going to rally behind. Obviously, we want to go after the people responsible, do it in a responsible way. Even those who may be harboring these people, as the president said tonight, he'll have total support, in my view, from Congress. Obviously, there are questions that have to be raised here about this. You've had this today, somewhere between 15 and 20 terrorists commandeer 4 aircraft and 3 airports and attack 2 major targets in the United States. How does that happen? And today is not the day to raise that question specifically, but certainly that will be a question raised by people across the country and as we talk with people at our intelligence agencies. The issue of a national missile defense is an important debate. I happen to be one who believes there's a rationale for investing research dollars in that area, but it's a lower priority in my view, and I think this view is shared by many of my colleagues in Congress, many Democrats and some Republicans who believe that there's a higher degree of danger that we face from the very kind of thing we saw today, that we've seen on recent terrorist attacks. So while we support the idea of some research in missile defense, this nation faces a far greater threat from the kind of tragedy that we witnessed in New York and Washington.
Secretary Christopher, once the U.S. government learns specifically who is responsible for these attacks today against targets here in the United States, what should President Bush do?
Well, you obviously have to take very strong action. Wolf, I think we have to focus not only on the direct perpetrators, but those who support them, as well as perhaps those who give a place to them. The United States cannot sit back and just try to find out who the people on the firing line here in the United States were. We have to find out where the support came from, who might be harboring them in the future. I worry a little bit that the bin Laden solution is too glib, too easy for us. We have to get deeper. We have to drill down and find out what has really happened here, what violated our security, why we had so little intelligence about this. We have a whole big issues ahead of us. All of the old issues, I think, are going to fade until we resolve this particular problem.
Jim Steinberg, you were President Clinton's Deputy National Security Advisor at the time of the Twin Embassy bombings in East Africa, for which the U.S. retaliated against targets associated with Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, as well as that factory in Sudan. It doesn't seem to have done much good if, in fact, Osama bin Laden's operation was, in fact, responsible for today's attacks.
Well, we still don't know who's responsible, but I think that what we've learned is that you can't deal with this in terms of just a single military strike or a single shot. This is a long-term effort. We didn't stop the embassy bombing in the Africas, but we were able to thwart a number of other efforts by groups like Osama bin Laden, as we saw around the time of the millennium. This is going to be a day in and day out kind of effort. We have to develop the intelligence sources. We have to work with other countries to make sure that there is no support for these kinds of efforts. But we're going to be in this for a long haul, because this is the major threat facing our country.
And Senator Dodd, what do you recommend that President Bush do? The same question I asked Secretary Christopher. If the U.S. knows definitively who is responsible and who may have been protecting that terror operation, what should the United States do in terms of military retaliation?
Well, I think the former secretary has it right, and I think you've heard others talk about it here today, and that is, first of all, assure the American public, which he did tonight. I commend the President for his speech. Tomorrow the Congress will rally behind him. This nation will speak with one voice in these coming days. He ought to take advantage of the offers that have been made by President Putin and others, allies, competitors around the globe that care about this kind of an issue, build the coalition in support. And as Jim Steinberg has just said, and others have pointed out today, this is not a silver bullet solution where one raid, one attack against one group by bin Laden or others is going to solve the problem. This is a systemic response we've got to organize in the weeks and months and years ahead if we're going to ultimately defeat terrorism, and I hope the President will do that.
Secretary Christopher, very briefly, you've been around. Before we go to Secretary Christopher, our Bill Hemmer is in Atlanta. He has some additional news he wants to report. Bill, share that information with us.
Yeah, Wolf, thank you, and I apologize for the interruption, but CNN's Deborah Fayrick by telephone now on the George Washington Bridge. New Yorkers know it as the GW Bridge, with a breaking story there about a vehicle or possibly a truck that may have been loaded with explosives inside. Deborah, what are you finding out? Deborah Fayrick, Bill Hemmer, CNN Center, Atlanta. Can you hear me? All right, clearly in the interest of live television, we're having a difficult time establishing our connection with Deborah, but we will try and hang on at this point. Deborah, can you hear me? Bill Hemmer in Atlanta. All right, 3 times does not work. Apparently difficulties with the cell phone there. But what we're getting right now through the Associated Press and through Deborah Fayrick at this time right now that, I'm sorry, Steve, give it to me again. Okay, we're getting a report through the Associated Press that there are cell phone calls being made from those possibly trapped inside the World Trade Center. Again, we're getting that report through CNN's Deborah Fayrick, also through sources of the Associated Press. We're going to try and establish that telephone line. We don't mean to frustrate our viewers, but clearly at this time, we're trying to getting it just as much as you are at this time. Let's go back to Washington and let Wolf continue for a moment. Then we'll come back and straighten things out here. We'll get our facts straight, get our telephone line established. But for now, back to D.C. and Wolf.
All right, thanks, Bill. I want to bring back Secretary Christopher, who's old enough to give us some perspective, historic perspective, on this day in American history. There's been a lot of comparisons to Pearl Harbor, which you, of course, lived through. What is your sense of this day?
This is a tough day for America. Wolf, I think we need to be calm and focused and relentless. We've responded before, as we did after Pearl Harbor. I remember how that brought the nation together. We've been through a number of difficult days in the United States. One event that I remember, and that was the assassination of Martin Luther King and riots in 26 cities around the country. Quite different in nature than this, but nevertheless, our nation has pulled through these things, and we will pull through this with great strength. But we must, as I say, be relentless in the pursuit of finding out, getting to the bottom of this and finding out who did it, and then taking very, very strong action.
Jim Steinberg, based on your career in studying terrorism and counterterrorism, can the American public assume that this operation, the one that happened today, is over with, that they can go back to work tomorrow and relax?
I think we have to have a balance here. We need to take prudent precautions. I think we've seen the military and other officials today take measures to make sure that we understand the scope of these things. I think people do need to take precautions as we go forward until we learn more about who was behind this and have some confidence. At the same time, we can't let these kinds of terrorist forces intimidate America or so change our way of life that we can't carry on about our business. So it's that balance that we're going to have to draw in the days ahead.
Senator Dodd, will America be different as a result of what happened today?
Well, clearly, and obviously we've got to go back and tighten up security and take a look at what present procedures are to minimize what occurred. My hope would be, though, that the terrorists today had a success. It was a remarkable success, and obviously questions are going to have to be raised about it. But I don't want to give them the additional success of watching us all of a sudden start to tailor or trim our Bill of Rights or the rights that Americans enjoy. If we do that, then they really win here. And so it's going to be important that we take those steps we need to, but not to give them the added victory of watching America's civil liberties be so restrained that the nature of our society changes as a result of their actions.
Secretary Christopher, you've been involved in these kinds of situations. How does a president, how does a vice president, a secretary of state, a secretary of defense balance the need to show the terrorists that the U.S. will not capitulate to what they're doing, while at the same time taking the precautions necessary to protect the citizenship?
Well, I think the United States has been through things like that before. We ought to learn from some events after Pearl Harbor. We ought to be very careful in the way we treat Arab Americans and not regard them all as being guilty if it turns out that Osama bin Laden is at the bottom of this. I think we all regret what we did to the Japanese Americans during World War II, so we have to learn from the past. On the other hand, the primary focus at the present time has to be to get to the bottom of this, to drill down, to find out what caused this, and then to improve our security and intelligence. I think this is a defining day for the United States. We won't be the same for some time again. September 11th, 2001 is a very black day for the United States, and we'll be some time recovering from it.
Jim Steinberg, there seems to be a nuance, perhaps a very significant nuance of difference in the policy enunciated by President Bush today as compared to what President Clinton did after other terrorist attacks against U.S. targets, when President Bush said this: "We will make no distinction," let me repeat that, "we will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." The Clinton administration, the administration for which you served, did make a distinction. Am I right?
I wouldn't say there was a distinction, Wolf. We took some fairly tough measures against the Taliban government. We also tried to get others to support us in that. We got the Saudi government to cut off some of their contacts with the Taliban. We put some pressure on Pakistan to try to do that as well. So I think we can all support what President Bush said tonight. I think that to the extent that there is further indication that, notwithstanding their commitments, that the Taliban has tolerated terrorist activities on its territory, then I think it's entirely appropriate to hold them accountable.
Well, let me just say, I agree with that. I think it can go beyond harboring. The president said harbor, but I think those who finance them, those who train them, any of these countries, this is a new chapter tonight, and whatever may have been the policy in the past, the action today, I think, has changed that forever.
All right, Senator Dodd, I want to thank you. Secretary Christopher, of course, we want to thank you. And Jim Steinberg here in Washington, thanks so much for your insight. We're learning a lot today, obviously, somewhat sadly. Bill Hemmer is back in Atlanta. Bill?
Well, thank you. And again, our apologies to our viewers about 5 minutes ago, but we do have an established connection now with CNN's Deborah Fayrick. The reports we're getting now, 2 or 3 men arrested on the New Jersey Parkway. Deborah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. That is the information that I am getting from two sources, that there was a van either on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, and that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van. That is right now all I'm hearing, but again, 2 to 3 people in custody, and we are trying to get more information on that right now.
Deborah, I don't mean to put you on the spot here. Do you know where on the Jersey Turnpike this was? How far from New York City?
We do not know that. We are looking into that. There is one report that it was on the New Jersey Turnpike. There is another report that it was very close to the bridge, if not on the bridge. So again, these details all emerging, and we're trying to piece them together. But that's what we've got so far. 2 to 3 people in custody right now, found with a van filled with explosives.
All right, well understood. Deborah, where are you tonight?
Right now, we are at the Police Academy. There's going to be a press briefing here. We just arrived down here. Just looking around here, they have called in a lot of recruits. Everybody's standing by. They are wearing police vests. They're being mobilized to duty throughout the city. When I was on my way to the office, Bill, I can tell you that there was a police detail outside of the Empire State Building. There was also heavy security around the United Nations, and the streets of this city just very quiet right now. I saw a couple of people on cell phones. One woman was just crying. It's become very clear that many people in this city either knew somebody who was in that World Trade Center or knew somebody who was there. So that's the magnitude of this tragedy.
And Deborah, quickly here, you're waiting for a briefing, I gather, based on your previous statement?
Yes, we are. We are hoping to get some more details right now. I can tell you that every couple of minutes we hear sirens, and it's either police cars or fire trucks. They're the only cars really that are on the street. Maybe
all right, Deborah, I apologize for the interruption. New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani now speaking again.
We're hopeful that we'll be able to rescue some more people. I have no idea how many others, but at least there's some hope that we'll be able to get some people out. We have been able to get 2 people out who have been identified as Port Authority police officers. I don't have their identities, and I don't have their condition. That's the good news, and all night we'll keep trying to extricate people through tomorrow. And there are over 1,000, well over 1,000 rescue workers and emergency workers down there now. Could be 2,000. And the New York Police Department and the Fire Department, emergency services, the assistance that we've gotten from the National Guard, and if you go down there, you'll see fire departments from East Meadow and Belmore and northern New Jersey. And we really appreciate their efforts. It will be of great assistance all during the night. If you have questions that we can answer or try to answer, the number is 1-212-560-2730. That's 1-212-560-2730. I know that there's great concern over what the numbers of people lost are. We don't know the answer to that. The dimension will be very large. In terms of the people we're looking for, it's a couple of hundred firefighters and police officers, which is a staggering number. As far as the number of people in the building, that'll be in the thousands. But there's no way of knowing at this point, and we're going to keep praying and hoping that we save as many people as possible.
Mr. Mayor, there are reports that there are a group of survivors in the basement of the World Trade Center, that they have cell phones, they've been calling their relatives in Seattle to tell them precisely where they are, and that there's a group of NYPD police who are with them and alive and well. Do you know about this?
I know that rescue effort's been going on for a couple of hours, yes.
Mayor, do you know anything about the report about the possible explosives that were found in New Jersey?
Yeah, I think the police commissioner was able to get information about that.
I just got a confirmation from the chief of detectives. He's reached out to the FBI. They have confirmed that someone has been stopped in New Jersey, 3 men in a van. However, there was no explosives in the van. All right, they're being held for questioning.
Where in New Jersey?
I can't say yet.
Okay.
Why were they stopped, and why do you think they're connected with this?
We can't tell at this point. It's between the FBI and the Port Authority. We just got the confirmation by phone after I left the last briefing.
Were they on the George Washington Bridge as they were heading to New Jersey?
No, they weren't.
There were rumors that there were explosives. Where did those rumors come from, or why did that begin to circulate?
I can't tell
Are
you.
they in the Meadowlands, Police Commissioner?
Excuse me?
Are they in the Meadowlands?
It's my understanding, but we haven't confirmed that.
Do we know why they were stopped, sir?
Not yet.
Commissioner, can you tell us anything about the rescue of the 2 Port Authority officers or the ongoing effort with the people in the basement, where the Port Authority officers were pulled out of, or the details?
We can't say yet. It was Trinity and Church where the officers were that were just pulled out. The other people that are still in the building, we can't tell exactly where they are.
We all know that the Port Authority is housed in the World Trade Center. Any idea of the status of their operations?
They've lost a lot of people, and we don't know the full dimension of that either. But the Port Authority have a lot of people that are missing, and we were fortunate to find 2 of the police officers. We'll keep searching for the others, but they have sustained a lot of losses.
The group of people with the cell phones that Marcia referred to, do you have any idea how big a group that size is in that particular location?
I don't think we know the exact numbers. We know it's more than 2 people. It's two people communicated, and they say there were more people there.
And do
the people who are roaming around the city trying to find information about those who are missing, what are they supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? And who's collecting that information?
The phone number that they should call is 212-560-2730. And then, as we have information about people either who have been recovered or are dead, we'll let them know that.
Is our morgue able to handle this?
We had a meeting with the medical examiner earlier, went over it with him. He believes that he's able to handle it. He'll start handling it at 30th Street, which is the morgue for Manhattan. He'll then be able to move up to the Bronx, where he also has facilities. And then we have the possibility of using the pier on the west side, which is set aside in case the numbers get too difficult to handle. But he thinks he can handle at least a good deal of it tomorrow and the next day, right in Manhattan.
Commissioner Bonnet, can you talk about the loss of the fire department?
We've got over 300 people that are missing that we can't account for. We believe that many of them are gone. We don't. We'll keep looking. We have hundreds of people over there now trying to find as many possible locations that they might be in some way in a void or whatever, and still be able to breathe and still alive. But we believe that most of these people, I think, are going to be unable to pull out. So we'll just keep working on it. And I have a number I'd like to give. We haven't been able to make any contact with the families because we're still unsure of the situation. So the number for the families who haven't spoken to their loved one in the course of this whole horrible day, if they call this number, we'll at least tell them that that this is a person that's missing, or that we have had some contact with this person. The number would be 718-999-2541 is a number that we'll be using at Fire Department headquarters. It's just for firefighters. Just for firefighters. Firefighters and fire officers, EMS personnel. I would we'll man those numbers. That number will roll over to 10 lines, and we'll be able to just try to give them some information. We don't have a lot, so that's why we haven't been calling them like we would normally do.
What about the top members of your staff who may have been lost? Debbie Wood.
I'm sorry, Debbie.
What about the top members of your staff who may be lost?
We've notified their families already. Spoke to them earlier.
How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about it? I don't know what to say. We lost people that have given over 40 years. Commissioner Feehan has had every job in the department. Probably the most valuable person in the department. When I got this job, the mayor and Commissioner Safer said, make sure you keep Bill Feehan. Haven't regretted that one day. He's given a whole life to this department. Chief Gansey, the same thing. Chief of Department, 33 years, 34 years. Ray Downey, we just honored him with a dinner almost 40 years of service, world-renowned for situations like this, telling me how dangerous it was when we first got there, all the possibilities, everything that he was trying to do to, get the people out. Father Judge, I don't know if you know Father Judge, one of the nicest men you could possibly find in the whole world. We haven't found other people yet either. I don't even want to mention their names. Some of the best people in this department. I can't find anybody from 5 rescues and 7 squads, and it's just it's a devastating thing. I don't know. Well, the fire department will recover, but I don't know how.
Commissioner Carrick, in the police department, do you have any idea how many people you're looking for at this time right now?
The number we're looking for is in excess of about 32, 33 people. That's what we know as of right now. And for the members, for the family members of the police department, if they have questions or they need to contact us regarding their family members, they can call 718-677-8238. It's the Special Operations Division, and we'll be able to help them as much as possible.
How close are rescue teams able to get to the scene, assuming there are people who are there?
The rescue teams are able to get very close now. It was very difficult during the day, but in most places they now can operate. There's still a few dangerous areas, but they're able to operate. They're able to operate down there now.
And are there pockets where people maybe?
Yes, we're very hopeful that there are pockets where there are people, not only the ones that we know about, but hopefully others. A group of firefighters were at St. Vincent's Hospital that were in a void for 4 or 5 hours, and we're hopeful that there are other situations like that. And that's why our rescue workers are working so furiously.
How big a group was that?
That was a company. It was a group.
Company survived?
No, it was about 7.
Yeah, it's 5 guys in an office.
5 guys
6.
survived.
Yeah, 6 men.
This was earlier today. They were in I believe 1 World Trade Center, and the firefighter described to me that they were there for about 4 or 5 hours, and when they walked out, they were shocked to see that the building had come down, because they knew there had been damage, but they had been in a void, so they had been protected.
What unit are we talking about, Bill?
I'm not sure.
Forget.
We'll find out for you.
I think I remember, but I don't know.
Can you just tell us again about the 2 Port Authority police officers, how they were found, their condition?
No, the only thing we know is that they were found a while ago, that they're alive, and we'll get you more information about their condition.
And since we're talking about the Port Authority, I guess it's a reasonable assumption there's a large number of Port Authority police officers missing as well?
I'm sure there are. We don't have those exact numbers, as well as Port Authority personnel, the people who work for the Port Authority.
Wasn't their office in?
Yeah, their office was there, and so we don't know how many people were actually at work. The first attack was at about 8:50, and then there was time to evacuate a lot of the building. So we're not sure at this point how much of the 2 buildings were evacuated in that period of time between the first attack by the airplane until the first building came down. We're hopeful, because we saw a lot of people leaving. We all did at the time we were down there. We're hopeful that a lot of people got out of the building, but we don't know the numbers yet.
Maybe Commissioner Carrick could tell us a little bit about the high-ranking members of the department. I understand 1 was missing for a while. We were able to find him, and I believe the police surgeon was medevaced out to New Jersey. Did I get that right?
No, not to my knowledge. Police sergeants accounted for the ranks that we're looking at and looking for are the ranks of police officer and detectives, and perhaps a few sergeants.
Last question, Deborah Fair. Last one, Deborah Fair.
Is there a coordinated effort right now to find out who exactly may have not been in the building when this happened, or people just calling various companies? How will we find out who was there and who was not there?
Yeah, we're trying very hard by communicating with the Port Authority and some of the major tenants. We're trying to recreate how many people are there. But actually, the major effort is really focused on trying to rescue people. The people who are out, I'm sure, have largely communicated with their families and are doing that. I saw many people doing that on the telephone as we were leaving. So really the focus of our efforts is to try to get as many people out as possible with the hope that there are still people that are alive, like the ones that we know about.
Mayor, you said earlier that there were several other buildings downtown that may be structurally unsafe that you're still not sure about and that in fact may collapse. Has anything changed from earlier today?
No, I think no, I don't think so. Not from the last time we had a briefing, and we were down there. And
5 World Trade Center, I heard, was in some kind of trouble. What's the status of 5 World Trade?
I don't know.
We're going to wait for daylight. Engineers to take a look at all these buildings.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We're going to wait till the daylight tomorrow. We'll have building and structural engineers check all these buildings that we're concerned about to make sure they're safe for rescue workers and to see what we can do to salvage these buildings.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you can ask your last question. Go ahead.
How long
Go ahead. He's been trying. He's been trying for a while.
In terms of how long does the department expect people to survive underneath rubble like that? I mean, is there some sort of...
There's no. They could survive for some time. There's no way to know exactly how long, but it really it depends. And I think one of the things that comes out of today is it depends on. I guess it depends on the will of God, or as to where you are, where you're standing, as this firefighter pointed out to us earlier.
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify something Commissioner Carrick said, you were about 10 minutes past from when you were standing with several of the high-ranking officers who you lost, and then you went to Barclay Street. Have you thought about that 10 minute gap, how you were 10 minutes from being in a horrible situation?
I haven't had a chance to think about it yet.
But is that sort of accurate, that you would have been with them, you were with them 10 minutes earlier before the building collapsed?
Well, some of the people that we lost, we saw, like Father Judge and Chief Gansey, Bill Feehan. We saw them about 10 minutes before we went over to 75 Barclay Street. And as I talked to their families, and I explained to them that they were working very hard and they were working at what they love to do. And I'm sure their efforts will end up having saved other lives. And their families can be very proud of them. And we have, without any doubt, the best police department, the best fire department, the best police officers, the best fire officers, the best emergency workers of any place in the whole world. And although today's tragedy is going to be enormous and there's no way to minimize it, if it weren't for them, this tragedy would be far worse. I mean, they executed brilliantly today. And I having watched it and having been a recipient of their services because we had to get ourselves out, I can tell you that whatever the number of casualties, without our police department, our fire department, our EMS, and the kinds of people that we have, many of whom lost their lives, there would be double or triple the number of casualties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Clearly, these briefings are becoming more and more difficult for city officials to meet and greet with reporters there. Many of their colleagues, co-workers, and friends were indeed killed today or are feared missing tonight. Mayor Rudy Giuliani indicating that the city is now prepared for thousands and thousands of bodies, and throughout the day tomorrow as the daylight comes up, as you look at a nighttime picture of downtown Manhattan, that indeed may be the scenario. At this point tonight, more than 300 firemen feared dead and missing. 78 New York City police officers are missing as well. These were the first men and women to respond to the scene earlier today. Also in that briefing, indications now, nothing confirmed, but indications that some people in the basement of the World Trade Center may be using cell phones to call relatives outside the area. Nothing confirmed again, but rescuers are aware that there is a possibility that some people may be indeed on their telephone inside at this point. Also, another clarification, we reported about 30 minutes ago, a van had been pulled over outside of New York City. We now understand that 2 or 3 men are being held for questioning But as for explosives on board that van, that has been denied by police officials there in the briefing we just heard. Again, we'll track it throughout the night. It is almost midnight East Coast time. This tragedy continues to unfold this evening. And with more in Washington, here's Wolf Blitzer again. Wolf.
Thank you, Bill. Raymond Kelly was the police commissioner in New York City during the first bombing at the World Trade Center complex in New York. He joins us now live from New York. Commissioner Kelly, I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that you knew some of the men and perhaps women law enforcement officials who were killed today.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Particularly Bill Feehan, who has been a member of the New York City Fire Department for over 40 years. Father Judge was a chaplain for well over 20 years. Both of them were just super people, and I've known other people who are missing as well. So it's just a terrible, heart-wrenching tragedy.
I know this must be an emotional, very sad moment for you, but share with us what's going through your mind.
Well, it's something that I always think of in these tragedies is police officers and firefighters run into these buildings when the rest of the world is leaving and running out. What makes these people that do that? I mean, they're just a unique breed. These numbers are just catastrophic. When we talk about the number of firemen and police officers that are missing, they know that they put their lives on the line every day, but nobody could envision casualty numbers like this. So it is just an unspeakable tragedy.
And now the investigation has begun. How does the police, how do other law enforcement authorities in New York begin such an investigation?
Well, there's an entity in New York called the Joint Terrorist Task Force. It's made up of New York City police investigators and FBI investigators and some other agencies as well. It's been in existence since 1980. It was the first Joint Terrorist Task Force created. That is the component that did the...
Commissioner Kelly, stand by one second. We've just received fresh video, new video of the first plane smashing into the World Trade Center. I want to show that to you and to our audience. Let's just watch. The first plane smashing into the World Trade Center. We've seen video throughout the day of the second plane that went into the World Trade Center. When you see that, Commissioner Kelly, when you see these horrific pictures that none of us can comprehend, how do you explain what this enormity of this tragedy was?
Well, you can't explain it. It is the enormity is just mind-boggling. I think we think in the abstract of terrorist attacks. But when you see this, when actually you see the film of Plane 1, Plane 2, and then the collapse of the buildings, I mean, the world witnessed this. Terrorist attacks often happen in the dark of night. But here, everybody throughout the world, the civilized world, has seen this. And it's just incredible.
And is it fair to assume, Commissioner Kelly, that life in New York City will never again be the same?
Well, I don't know. New Yorkers, Americans are pretty resilient, pretty tough. I think certainly for the short term, life is going to change significantly. But I hope it doesn't change too drastically, because then the terrorists have won. They've accomplished what they set out to do, and that is to significantly alter our way of life. So I think we have to certainly pay much more attention in the short term to security issues. It appears that security at the airports was obviously breached to get these hijackers on the aircraft. I think tomorrow you'll see that significantly strengthened throughout the country. I think life in New York, certainly below 14th Street for the foreseeable future, is going to be different. Tremendous cleanup that has to be done. There's no power in much of that area. There are gas leaks that are happening now. It's a dangerous environment. It is certainly for the foreseeable future going to change life in New York. I hope it's not permanent.
Raymond Kelly, the former commissioner, the police commissioner in New York City, thanks for joining us on this terrible night. Our Washington Bureau Chief Frank Sesno has been checking his sources. He has some additional information. Frank, what have you learned?
Well, Wolf, I've been talking with someone this evening who was very much in the middle of all of this, a government official who was very carefully briefed throughout the day. And what he makes clear with the additional information that he's providing is that the confusion and the chaos and the speed of these events unfolding today revealed a situation that remains really, truly breathtaking and incomprehensible, but that there are some leads. Let me tell you what this official said. First of all, on one of the planes that was hijacked, Wolf, and we don't know which one, there was a keyed microphone open, so there were sounds and some discussion and some noise in the background. Apparently this was that was heard. This official, who has been carefully briefed on this, describes what was heard as duress. And of course, investigators are going to be listening very closely to that. Secondly, this official says there is, quote, credible information and leads that are being developed and pursued that gives law enforcement a feeling of some degree of confidence that their investigation will move forward. It would not provide details. We've heard just a little while ago of some arrests in New Jersey. I can't tell you whether those pieces of information are related. Beyond that, some more information, again, as to the speed with which things occurred. There were 4 hijacked jetliners today, as we know. This official says there were no transponder codes indicating hijacking activity punched in on any of those planes. There's a 4-digit code, Wolf, that pilots can punch in, so it's almost a covert notification that a hijacking is underway. That did not happen in any of the cases today. This official says that at one point government officials today feared there were as many as 7 hijacked jetliners. Obviously, there turned out to be just 4. But 4 is way too many and has led to this terrible tragedy that we've witnessed here today. So, Wolf, the investigation continuing in rapid fire. This official says that a judgment will be made in the morning, looking very carefully at the airports and airspace across the country as to when air traffic in the U.S. Can resume.
Frank Sesno here in Washington. Thank you very much. Our Jeff Greenfield is standing by in New York with more. Jeff?
Thank you. We have heard for the last 13 or 14 hours that this is, in the worst sense, a historic day. We thought we ought to talk to 2 people to give us some historical context. From Washington, Pulitzer Prize-winning writer David McCullough is with us. David, you're with us here. How you do?
Yes, I am.
And here in New York, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist David Halberstam. Mr. McCullough, this country has always considered itself blessed, protected by 2 oceans. In World War II, nothing happened here. Nobody was injured by bombs. When a strike like this happens, and it has happened in the past to Americans, does it do something to us, to our sense of who we are and how protected we are?
Well, it's almost certainly going to bring us closer together. It's going to make problems that we thought were of great importance seem less by far. We've never had violence of this kind happen on our home ground. War brought to our own home place this way since the Civil War. The Johnstown flood, the Galveston flood, 2 of the worst disasters in the country's history, will probably seem less than this when the awful toll is added up. I think it's really worse than Pearl Harbor because it was an attack on innocent civilians, not on a military target. The world is not at war, at least in the usual sense, as it was in 1941, when war was very much in the air, even if we weren't in it. And the scale of it all, and the fact that our own equipment, our own airplanes, our own citizens flying in those airplanes were used as human bombs against our own great structures, the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. Heroic New York, high-rise New York, was seen to collapse before our eyes, unimaginable. It's a treachery, it's a day of horror unlike anything we've ever experienced in our whole time as a nation.
And David Halberstam, that brings another point up. We've often talked, after the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, that the end of history, somebody called it in the book. We were only at a time when small events would move us.
No. New chapter in history. I mean, it was, the Cold War had its own fears, a bipolar world, but in some ways it was a safer world. I mean, it was more controlled. Now it's more fragmented, it's more volatile, and this is an act of war. And a kind of war to which we are sort of uniquely vulnerable because the magnetic field of our power and our intelligence is very frail as you get deeper into what is apparently the place of origin of this terrorism. So there's, how do we manifest our power, which is very real, in a place so far in distance? It's a very, you start the day numbed by it, and then the magnitude of what it means and how it changes life. A free and open society being challenged by this kind of terrorism to continue the freedom of movement and access, which is so elemental to the way we live.
And David McCullough, there have been times when we have been faced by war that we have, at least temporarily, given up some of our civil liberties. Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus in the Civil War, the internment of the Japanese. Are we at a different point now in our history, or are we likely to respond in some measure by restricting our own freedom to get some more security?
Well, I really do think things will change after this. It's inevitable. This is a day that will change history. It will change it in some ways for the better, but I'm afraid that will also mean a curtailing, a trimming up, maybe even a vitiating of the open society as we know it. And that's a sad time, but it's the reality. It stresses our vulnerability in a way that we've not experienced in our past as a nation. It happened here. Any of us could have been on those planes. Any of us could have been, and we all were, in a sense, going to work in those buildings this morning. And as David Halberstam just said, it's the accumulative effect of the day as it's progressed on all of us, on the whole country, so that tonight we really feel the weight when the Mayor Giuliani was talking and the Fire Commission talking about the losses of those brave people. That brings this home as nothing else can.